Will you follow me when the sky starts to change? Yeah, we won't be afraid. We'll never be the same again.
You're streaming with the Fantasy Follow. And welcome to TFF Live, special Saturday Stars edition of our show, streaming live right now on our YouTube channel. We do apologize for the technical difficulties. I don't know what happened. I have to say that's the first of all these shows where I've had that happen. Hit the button to go live, and suddenly no internet. So glad for those of you that stuck with us, and for those of you that aren't, hopefully you'll join us back. But we are live here streaming our YouTube channel. If you're watching on replay, thanks for joining us as well. Please feel free to leave us our comments. However, right now live on our YouTube channel, we have a special edition of TFF Live. What we're going to do tonight is we got rundown of the top matchups for Week 10, kind of similar to a start and sit, but not necessarily ranked in any order. We got a whole bunch of information to go through for that. And for most of your leagues, today is, or slash tonight, I guess it's already Sunday at this point, so we call it Sunday Stars. But for most of you, this is your trade deadline. So we are here answering your fantasy football questions the entire show. And let me put this back up on the screen. Feel free to jump in the live chat. We'll talk about trades. We'll talk about lineups, anything you want to talk about fantasy football-wise. We got a lot of content to go through as well. But we are here for your questions, and we'll be taking them all show. So whenever you join us, if we're talking about something else, don't worry about it. The chat's what we're here for. We'll jump right on over as soon as I see the notifications that the chat's there. So let me get this off the screen. And with no further ado, let's get started. First of all, let's get you a little promo before we start anything off here. And we want to let you know that this is a special edition of TFF Live, but our normal show is tomorrow, the TFF Live Sunday pregame show. And we are streaming live on our YouTube channel every Sunday at noon, taking you right up until game time, answering all your fantasy football questions and getting you ready for your matchups each week. And that'll be tomorrow. Please feel free to join us. If you're a frequent viewer of the show, we'll welcome you back. And if you're a new viewer, glad to have you. A little bit more information about us. We are the Fantasy Follow. We're a brand new channel here on YouTube. If it's your first time, welcome. Again, you can find us also on Twitter at the Fantasy Follow. And that's fantasy spelled FNTSY. And you can also send us any fantasy football questions on our Twitter account using the hashtag AskTFFLive, and we answer those questions live on our Sunday show. Facebook/The Fantasy Follow and our website, thefantasyfollow.com. So again, we'll welcome you in. This is a special edition. This was planned for Saturday night, but now it's Sunday morning here on the East Coast. But wherever you are, we're with you, and we'll be with you until we get through our content or until we get a whole bunch of questions from you guys, either way. So at any rate, the basis of tonight's show is Sunday Stars. So what we're going to do is we got top matchups for Week 10 for tomorrow to go through. And these are basically your similar to starts, but not necessarily ranked in order. This is just kind of a compilation of all the different players to look for tomorrow as top matchups in their games. And we'll start out at the wide receiver spot. And our first top matchup is going to be Robert Woods from the LA Rams. Woods playing the Seattle Seahawks. Seattle is allowing the most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. Now, Woods has been pretty solid this year. I'll give you some of his stats. Last year when Woods played Seattle, he had 25.7 fantasy points against the Seahawks. And last week, their last game before their bye, he had 28.4 in Week 8. So a decent little run here going for Robert Woods. Seattle has given up 12, 20 or more fantasy points players this year at the wide receiver spot, and they have allowed 9 100 or more yard receivers this year as well. 3 touchdowns or more, and that was against the Bills last week. They gave up, and they are giving up the most passing yards in the league. So Robert Woods, the first of your top matchups on tonight's show. And in addition, right along that same line, Cooper Kupp, wide receiver from the LA Rams, another top matchup. I feel like either of these two players could easily be in the top 5 starts for this week. Kupp, again, playing the Seahawks. Seattle allowing the most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Cooper Kupp, last year in 2 games versus the Seahawks, Kupp averaged 20.6 fantasy points against them. And last week against Miami, a big 20 targets. That was Week 8, of course, the Rams coming off a bye. Over 100 yards for Kupp, so he had a nice game last game. And again, same stats as Robert Woods in terms of the defensive matchup. Obviously, playing Seattle this year, you're just about starting everybody. They're giving up ridiculous amounts of passing yards. So Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, both great stars for tomorrow's games. Our next player we've got here in our Saturday Stars top matchups for Week 10, it's Allen Robinson, wide receiver for the Chicago Bears. I almost said the Chicago Bulls. It's late already. You can tell. The Bears playing against Minnesota. They are allowing the second most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. They have given up 22 or more fantasy points to 5 different players this year, and they are allowing the third most passing yards in the league. think this is a great matchup for Robinson. He, in his 2 games last year versus Minnesota, granted their defense has been giving up much more passing yards this year than last, but even last year he averaged 15.0 fantasy points, and he had 8 catches in both of those games last year. His last 2 games this year, he has averaged 17.9 fantasy points, has had 80 or more yards in both of those games. So I look for another good game from Allen Robinson this week, especially with the absence of David Montgomery at the running back spot. They really don't have much of anybody to fill in there. So I expect them to turn even more to the pass, and it's a good chance to do that because the Vikings have been very vulnerable to passing yards throughout this year. So I got Allen Robinson as a top matchup for tomorrow. The next guy on our list, it is Will Fuller from the Houston Texans. Tomorrow playing against the Cleveland Browns. That game is at Cleveland, and they are allowing the 5th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Fuller has been very productive this year, and really it's been one of the few years where, knock on wood, if you have Will Fuller on your roster, he's had relatively little trouble with injuries, which of course has been tough for him throughout the years. In terms of Cleveland, the defensive matchup, they have allowed 12 or more fantasy points to 6 different wide receivers this year. And also in the last 3 weeks, they have been very vulnerable as well. 11 receptions to Tyler Boyd in week 7, and they're giving up the 9th most passing yards in the league. For Fuller, he has had a touchdown now in 6 straight games. It's just been a great season for Fuller, and he has had 100 or more yards in 3 of those 6 games. So I certainly think that Will Fuller is worthy of being a top 5 start in anybody's mind tomorrow, as he has been for a lot of this year. So we've got Will Fuller as a top matchup for tomorrow. And let's see here. That's our 4 wide receivers. Let's put this back up for you, and we'll remind you that our live chat is open. We are here to answer your fantasy football questions all show. Got a host of information to go through, a bunch of top matchups, and also a rundown of some trade possibilities for this year that I put together. Just kind of an idea of different players that are out there in case you're looking for that last-minute deal before your trade deadline is up, or perhaps you're playing on another platform where your trade deadline is not up today. But either way, we are here to answer your fantasy football questions. Please feel free to jump in the chat anytime. Even if we're talking about something else, we're here for the chat, so we will get to those as soon as we can. All right, we'll get you back to our rundown of Saturday Stars / with technical difficulties that we had tonight, Sunday Stars, as we're a little bit later than we intended. But we're going to move on over to the running back spot next. First player that we're going to talk about for top matchups tomorrow, that's Antonio Gibson from the Washington football team. This is a great matchup to me, playing against the Detroit Lions. Detroit is allowing the most fantasy points to the running back spot. And Antonio Gibson is just the first of 2 players that we'll talk about in this matchup. But in terms of, we'll give you the stats first. Washington, 20 or more fantasy points to 7 players this year at the running back spot. That's tremendous. Great matchup again. They have allowed 4 players 20-plus points in the last 3 weeks alone. So obviously that means there was 2 in the same week. So again, why I said there's 2 players that we're going to talk about with this matchup. Washington is allowing the 3rd most rushing yards in the league. Gibson has had a touchdown each of the last 2 weeks now, and in week 7 versus Dallas, it was 128 rushing yards this game against the Detroit Lions. So I think Antonio Gibson is one of the top matchups for tomorrow. And along those same lines, in the same game, J.D. McKissic come to the forefront, and I believe he is also a top matchup worthy of a start in tomorrow's games. McKissic, again, playing the Lions. It's different, obviously, with McKissic because he is more of the pass catcher out of the backfield. You would expect Gibson to get more of the goal line touches, and you would think neither one of these teams are stellar, to say the least, this year. But you would not think this would be a deficit game, so to speak, for Washington. You would think that they would at least be close against Detroit. So those goal line touches are important, and also pass catcher out of the backfield. But it seems to me that McKissic has kind of been tabbed as the safety valve when Alex Smith has played. We haven't seen him have as much value in games before Smith was in the lineup. And in the 2 games that Smith has played, McKissic has seen 22 overall targets. 14 of them in that great game he had last week. So I like J.D. McKissic as well. I think both of these players are startable tomorrow. I wouldn't be surprised if either or both of them have very nice games for your fantasy lineup. All right, that is J.D. McKissick in our top matchups for tomorrow. The next player we'll talk about is Kareem Hunt for the Cleveland Browns playing against the Houston Texans. This game is in Cleveland, and Houston allowing the third most fantasy points to the running back spot. They have given up 19 or more fantasy points to 5 players this year at the running back spot, and they've allowed 100 or more rush yards to 4 players this year. We saw, in addition to that, James Robinson almost break that last week with 99 yards for Jacksonville. They are allowing the most rushing yards currently in the league, the Houston Texans are. So a great spot for Cleveland. And I know what you're thinking, well, Nick Chubb is back. Well, we saw Kareem Hunt in the games that Nick Chubb played still have tremendous value. Now, obviously, he's not going to be the only guy anymore there, but I think there's plenty to go around in this matchup. I think both guys will get theirs. In addition, it'll be interesting to see if kind of they limit the snaps a little bit to Chubb, or if they kind of give it the full run for him on his first game back from injury. In terms of Hunt, the last 3 games, he has averaged 12.1 fantasy points. He's had a couple of down games, but he has scored at least that much or more in every other game this season. So I don't expect this to be a continuation. I don't think that all of a sudden Kareem Hunt is on the struggle bus. I think he's going to be just fine. I think there's going to be plenty to go around in this matchup where both guys get theirs. And again, these are kind of, in terms of top matchups, not really talking about guys that you would consider auto start. I pretty much consider Nick Chubb an auto start, even though coming back from injury. So he's not necessarily somebody that I have on this list. But Kareem Hunt, I definitely do. I think definitely worthy of playing in your lineup tomorrow for sure. All right, the next guy on our list in Saturday Stars / Sunday Stars is Leonard Fournette from the Bucs playing against the Carolina Panthers. Carolina is allowing the 5th most fantasy points to the running back spot. This is another matchup where you've got 2 potential running backs to benefit. Running backs. I'm pretty sure that's the right way. Ronald Jones, obviously, in that backfield. I, for a while now, have felt that Fournette is taking this backfield over. And for sure, of those 2 players, he seems to be the one they trust more as a pass catcher. So that gives him a little bit nicer floor. And then if he does end up taking a bigger amount of the snaps, in terms of the rushes, then obviously he has even more of an opportunity to return value for your team. In terms of Carolina, they have allowed 25 or more fantasy points 4 times to running backs this year. They have given up 9 rushing touchdowns, another 2 to running backs through the air. And they're actually giving up the 13th fewest rushing yards in the league. However, they're giving up the 5th most fantasy points to running back. So what does that tell you? That you're scoring a lot of touchdowns because the yards aren't what's carrying that number for fantasy points. So look for Fournette to get in the end zone tomorrow. I expect him to get a fair share of the work, more than enough to give him value. I would suspect that Ronald Jones still has some value in your lineup as well, but I like Fournette of those 2. He led, also talking about Fournette, he led the Bucs last week in receptions with 6 in that just awful game that they played against the Saints. The previous 2 games to that, he was already averaging 12.9 fantasy points in those 2. We'll discount that last game, just throw it out. I think that continues to move in the upward trajectory for Leonard Fournette, so I've got him as a Saturday Star top matchup for Week 10 in your games tomorrow. Next guy on our list here at the running back spot, it's James Conner. This is kind of an interesting one to me from the Pittsburgh Steelers playing against Cincinnati. The Bengals allowing the 9th most fantasy points to the running back spot. Now, in terms of the matchup, definitely solid. Cincinnati has given up 17 or more fantasy points to 4 running backs this year. They gave up 112 rushing yards to Derrick Henry in Week 8, and they are allowing the 4th most rushing yards in the league. Conner, last year in the second of their 2 games had 20. I'm sorry, Conner only played them once last year because he was out due to injury in the second game. So this was actually the first game last year. He had 26.5 fantasy points against the Bengals. Now, the interesting part to me about Conner is what happened last week. We saw his snap count kind of dwindle. 46% snaps last week. It was 63% before that. Not really sure where that's coming from. We saw it was interesting to me, and I don't know what the reasoning is. If they're trying to protect Conner a little bit as we get deeper into the season, A little bit concerning if you have him on your rosters. I know that I do in a couple of spots, so it's obviously concerning to me. So I considered, possibly is that a reason to try to, make a move on him and see if you can bolster another spot in your lineup. I did not do that anywhere that I had him, but I suspect a lot of people did. If you have him on your rosters, nonetheless, I think this is a great matchup for Connor, but it will be worth monitoring what happens going forward to see how much work he continues to get, or if he does continue to lose some work in that backfield. All right, that's all of our wide receivers and all of our running backs that we have. So let's put up another quick promo here. We'll remind you that we are live tomorrow at 12 noon, or I guess at this point it is later today at 12 noon for the TFF Live Sunday pregame show. We're here every Sunday at 12, taking you right up until game time. We go through all the actives, inactives for you, talk about starts and sits, answering all your fantasy football questions, getting you ready for your matchups each week, and we can't wait to do our Week 10 show for everybody tomorrow. And once again, we will put up our other information for you as we run through our Saturday Stars. We are a brand new channel on YouTube. We appreciate you joining us, whether you're watching live or watching on replay. If you haven't done so yet, please do go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We want to make sure everybody gets those notifications when we have new content. We are a brand new channel, so we know that we're a little bit tougher to find. We don't necessarily come up as high in a lot of the searches right now. So hit that subscribe button. Make sure you get those notifications. And also, if you like our videos, please, we're always welcome to have you drop a thumbs up for us. Also, you can find us on Twitter at The Fantasy Follow, and that is spelled fantasy spelled FNTSY. And you can send us your fantasy football questions during the week to our Twitter account using the hashtag AskTFFLive. And we will answer those questions live on our Sunday pregame show. All right, and before we get back to the rest of the Saturday Stars / Sunday Stars, remind you that our live chat is open. We're here for your fantasy football questions. That's what we love to do. We have a lot of other content that we'll go through, but by all means, even if we're talking about something else, drop us a chat. We will get to those right away. That's what we're here for. We will finish up our content afterwards, so please feel free. We are live and with you for a little bit more tonight, so anything you've got, feel free to jump in the chat and drop us a question. All right, let's go ahead and get back to our top matchups for Week 10, and we're going to move on over to the quarterbacks. First one we're going to talk about, it's Jared Goff for the Los Angeles Rams, player that we have kind of oscillated back and forth between starts and sits throughout this year. It's been a little bit of a volatile year for Goff, but that's kind of to be expected. This week, I think, is a tremendous matchup. Again, playing the Seahawks, you're going to start most players in these matchups against that team. However, they are allowing the most fantasy points to the quarterback position this year. Now, let's talk about the matchup first. Seattle, they have allowed 23 or more fantasy points to 6 quarterbacks this season, 4 of them 29 or more. So, again, just a great matchup for Goff. They are allowing the most passing yards in the league. And we'll talk about last year against the Seahawks. Goff, in their 2 games, averaged 344 yards passing. This year, he has only had 1 game over 19 fantasy points in the last 5 games. So, again, it's been a little bit hit or miss. But as a matchup play and a potential streamer, obviously you've got some buys to deal with this week. City, perhaps Mahomes. Atlanta, perhaps Matt Ryan. Dallas and the Jets, I doubt that you're starting either one of those quarterbacks at this point. But perhaps Jared Goff is somebody that you might stream to get you through that bye week. I think it's a tremendous matchup. I would expect it to be a valuable one for anybody's lineup at this point. So Jared Goff, I got him as a top matchup for Week 10. The next guy on our list, no surprise here, Aaron Rodgers for the Green Bay Packers. He's been fantastic all year. Another great matchup this week for Jacksonville Jaguars. They are allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. They have given up 24 or more fantasy points to 5 different quarterbacks this year and have allowed 300 or more passing yards to 4 quarterbacks. They have 2 or more touchdowns in 3 of the last 4 games. They're allowing the 3rd most passing yards in the league. Rodgers, over his last 3 games, has had 11 touchdowns and has been 22 or more fantasy points in 6 of 8 games. So hardly a bad one in there. I don't expect this one to be a bad one either. My only thought here is that it's very possible, game script wise, that Cleveland plays a lot of this game with the lead. I think that's going to benefit Aaron Jones and potentially not benefit Aaron Rodgers quite as much. But nonetheless, when you've had 6 out of 8 games, 22 or more, you would expect that to continue. So I've got Aaron Rodgers as a Saturday star / Sunday star this week for week 10. All right, the next player on the top matchups at the quarterback position, it's going to be Derek Carr for the Las Vegas Raiders playing against the Denver Broncos. Denver is allowing the 8th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. They have allowed 19 or more fantasy points to the opposing quarterback in every game this season but one, and have given up 3 passing touchdowns each of the last 2 games. They are allowing, let's see, that says the 10th. Sometimes my writing's a little small. The 10th most passing yards in the league. Carr, only 1 game this year over 22 fantasy points. Now, there's been a couple spots where I thought the Carr was a worthy streamer. So it hasn't been quite as great as he's been playing well, but the fantasy points haven't quite been there. It seems like the yardage has interesting in that way. He has had 2 or more touchdowns in all but 2 of his games this year. I think this is a nice spot for Carr, perhaps another quarterback that you could stream this week. You would expect him to have a nice game in the matchup alone. And Las Vegas has been having a decent season overall. So I've got Derek Carr as a Saturday star for week 10. And the next guy at this spot, I've got Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson with one of the top matchups for week 10 tomorrow, playing against the Cleveland Browns, and that game is at Cleveland. The Browns are allowing the 10th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. They have given up 24 or more fantasy points to 4 quarterbacks this year and have allowed 400 or more passing yards, not 300, 400 or more passing yards in 2 separate games. They're allowing the 9th most passing yards in the league. Watson, now in 4 straight games, has been 24 or more fantasy points, so he is having a nice back half of this year after the shaky start that Houston got off to. He has had 2 or more touchdowns now, passing touchdowns, in 5 straight games. So I definitely like Deshaun Watson as a Saturday star and a top matchup at the quarterback spot for week 10. I'm going to take a look at the chat over here. I see a couple of chats, so let's go ahead and get to those. We'll get these graphics off the screen. And Kay Ellis talks. Glad to have you back, Kay Ellis. Glad to see you again. Looks like a familiar name to us here. Let's see what we got, what we can do for you. 3 to 6 keeper league PPR team. Ryan Moore. Okay, let's start again. Ryan Moore, Chark, Hollywood, Jefferson, DK, AJ, Brown, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Kareem Hunt, Jerick McKinnon, J.K. Dobbins, Mark Andrews. Trade the 2nd round pick, number 1, really a 5th round because keepers fill in the first 3 rounds, and the rest of yours is for Anderson and Mostert. Robbie Anderson and Raheem Mostert. Let me go back to your original one. So you're talking about picking up 2 players for nothing but a draft pick. And that's, if I'm reading this correctly, a 5th round pick. To me, I don't see that being a bad play. I think that now give me a little check on in terms of it's a keeper league, so not a dynasty. So the age is probably not as much of a big deal, but I'm going to take a look at Robbie Anderson and see where he's at in terms of, I don't know if I can call it up really quick. Trying to take a look at his amount of years he's been in the league. I don't believe that Anderson's been more than 3 or 4. I certainly don't think Mostert is a guy that you're going to stop seeing production from anytime soon. I will say this: I don't play. Most of my leagues are not keeper leagues, so this is a little bit more of a guess for me. I'm going to say that upfront, honestly, because like I said, I always try to give my best opinions. But to me, if you're only giving up a 2nd round pick and you're picking up 2 players, and it's a 2nd round, but it's actually a 5th. I mean, in the 5th round of a league with keepers, are you going to come up with anybody that's better than either Anderson or Mostert with that pick? That would be my question. And then if you're not, that's my guess. Again, like I said, this is a little bit of a territory that I don't quite have as much experience with. So I would gladly take your thoughts back in terms of what you think about that. But to me, yeah, I mean, If I'm drafting in the 5th round, am I going to get a Robbie Anderson or Raheem Mostert? I'm guessing no. I mean, I don't hate that play at all. It seems like a decent move to me. But hit me back. Let me know. Give me your thoughts. And again, appreciate you being with us. And absolutely love to see you again. And glad to have you back on tonight's show. Hit me up with any more chats as we go. I'll move on to Blue Crew. Blue Crew, glad to have you back as well. Recognize you from before. And here's what you got. It says, I'm starting Thielen, Kupp, and Higgins. I'm benching Godwin. Half-point PPR, but I'm extremely concerned about Thielen's matchup versus the Bears. I agree. Plus, the weather is crappy for that game. Your thoughts? I have Adam Thielen on my sit list for tomorrow. That'll be on our Sunday pregame show. As for tonight's show, I'm just going through kind of the top matchups. But I have Adam Thielen actually, I believe I may have even made him my top. I do. I have Adam Thielen actually as my top sit this week. The problem with Thielen is it's twofold. The Bears, I'm going to look up Thielen while we talk to make sure I can give you the right information. The Bears matchup is terrible. They're allowing the 3rd fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. They've given up 16 or more only twice this year. Let's see. What have I got here? The 9th fewest passing yards in the league. Thielen under 6 fantasy points each of the last 2 games since Dalvin Cook has been back. They clearly want to run the ball at this point, and Dalvin Cook has been phenomenal. If you're going to hit the Bears either way, you're going to have a better chance hitting them at the run than at the pass. Perhaps you're saved by game script there, but I don't necessarily see where Minnesota is going to fall behind in this game to Chicago. It's probably going to be one of those typical slug them out Chicago low-scoring games, I would think. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to pick up a lot of passing volume because of the game script. Kirk Cousins, I believe I have Cousins on my sit list as well, and I have some stats for him that if they help. Yeah, Cousins, let's see. He has only had an average of 17 pass attempts in these last 2 games since Dalvin Cook returned. Thielen, 4 targets in week 8 against Green Bay, 5 targets in week 9 against the Lions, 3 catches in 2 games respectively. To me, if you have a close player that you feel like you can comfortably play over Thielen, I don't think it's the wrong move tomorrow by any means. Most of the wide receivers throughout this year against the Bears, they have found their way to my sit list. I can't say that I've looked back to see, where they actually were after those weeks were over. But this is, I agree with your concern. Huge over Thielen here. Let me see if you got any follow-up. I do see a follow-up. So you say Godwin over Thielen. Well, interestingly, not that it helps, but I also have Chris Godwin on the sit list tomorrow. I'm worried about his injury. And now that we've got Evans and Brown in the mix there, that one worries me as well. But let me go back to your original one here. And let me just take a look. So you're starting, it's a 3 wide receiver, it looks like to me. Do you have any other options? Hit me back in the chat and let me know. Like if this is a 2 wide receiver, 2 running back with a flex, do you have a better option perhaps at running back in that flex? If you're going to play, Kupp is for sure a start. T. Higgins, I thought, has been great all year. That's a start to me. Cleveland playing against, who did I say Cleveland was playing against here? Yeah, Houston. I'm sorry, not Cleveland. Cincinnati against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh actually has been allowing more receiving yards than you would think this year, so that doesn't really concern me. I think that's going to be a passing game. Cincinnati has so much of their secondary hurt. I think Pittsburgh's going to run it up, and I think the volume passing-wise for Cincinnati is going to be there still. So I like Higgins as a start. I like Kupp as a start. Be back and let me know if you perhaps have a way around that Thielen, and I'll get back to that. And then I see another one here from K. Ellis, so I will jump back to that. Thank you, Blue Crew. And, hit me up with other options and let me know what you might have there. K. Ellis, we only keep 3 players of whoever we want. I don't think I would keep both players going into the offseason, meaning you don't think you would keep Anderson and looking for Mostert. Yeah, I mean, you've got, looking back through your roster, if you're only keeping 3, so out of those guys that you have here, I'm just guessing you're going to keep DK Metcalf, you're going to keep Derrick Henry, you're going to keep Josh Jacobs. Those would be my assumptions. Let me see here. And the rest of you, I see another one here. This guy also wants me to give him an 8th, which is really an 11th. How do you feel about your your look going forward in a keeper league? Obviously, you're not only concerned about this year. Do you feel like you're making this move more to take a run at the playoffs this year, or is this move more for the future? I sense from what you're saying here that you might not keep both of those players, that you're trying to load up and make a run at this year's playoffs. If that's the case, then perhaps sacrificing next year a little bit doesn't seem like a bad idea to me. I'm going to go back to your original one. Again, if you're not planning on keeping either of those two guys, yeah, it sounds like you're trying to load up for this year's playoffs, and I don't blame you at all. You got to go for it when you got it. So, yeah, that would be my question. If that's what you're doing, and I'm assuming that it is, then to me, you go for it. I mean, next year, you never know what could happen with injuries. If you're having a good enough season this year where you can really get there and make a run at your playoffs this year, I mean, Robbie Anderson has been very productive this year, and I wouldn't expect him. Let's do this. Let me look up their matchups. I'll help you out there. And I see Blue Crew. I see your response. I'll get to that next. Anderson in the playoffs. Weeks 14, 15, and 16. We've got week 14 against Denver, currently giving up the 8th most fantasy points to wide receivers. 15 is against Green Bay, the 6th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. And Washington in 16, the fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. So a couple of shaky matchups there. But again, you're looking for players that you can slide in that lineup and give yourself a shot to win. Mostert, I would assume, will have no issues being back by then from his injury. We'll take a look at his. Of course, I can never get, for some reason, San Francisco's players to come up for me. Let's take a look at Mostert's playoff run. Week 14 against Washington, giving up, come on, the 10th fewest fantasy points to running backs. 15, Dallas, the 15th fewest to running backs, but it's Dallas. You're going to get pops at the end zone there. Arizona, 16th fewest. Decent matchups there for Mostert. To me, it comes down to if you're making that run at this year, I don't think there's any. I don't see any issue with making that trade if you're willing to sacrifice those picks for next year. If you're in a position where, it doesn't look as great for you to make that playoff run this year and those draft picks are more valuable, then it might change that. But to me, if you're making that run and you got a shot, you got to take it when you can, because you never know with fantasy football, injuries happen. And, even a keeper league, guys can go quickly. So I like it. I like making that run to the playoffs. That's, to me, is always a good option. By all means, your roster best. But again, I try to present the, as best opinion as I can and as best information to back that up. So I think, I don't think it's a bad move to me. Thank you, K. Ellis, again for being with us. Be sure to join us again if you're tomorrow. And if you got any questions for us tomorrow, or if you got any other lineup questions for tomorrow's games, I'd be glad to go through those as well. And I see Blue Crew is back here. So I'm going to go back here. Let's see. Here it is from Blue Crew. 2 wide receiver, 1 flex starting Kamara and McKissick at running back. I also have Claypool and Highwood Brown. I just feel that I need to start my main guys for this one. This is frustrating. I understand. I will give you my honest opinion on this one. I like Claypool over Thielen for sure this week. I have Chase Claypool as one of my top 5 starts. The Bengals. So here's the deal. The report during this week was that the Cincinnati Bengals, they in practice were playing John Ross in their secondary because they're so banged up. And even Ross got hurt back there. They are hurting in the secondary right now. I'll give you some stats for Cincinnati. They have given up a 17-plus fantasy points player every week, except for week 1 this year. They've given up 100 more yards to 3 players in the last 3 weeks alone. They're currently allowing the 9th most passing yards in the league. Claypool, each of the last 2 weeks, has had 9 or more targets, and it was 13 targets last week at Dallas. I certainly understand being a little bit cautious with Claypool because of the fact that you've got Juju and you've got Deontay Johnson. I also like Eric Ebron a lot tomorrow. There are a lot of players there. However, again, this is the deal with these choices. And as a player myself, I understand. Like, I'll put together these start and sit lists, and then I'll look at my lineups, and I'll have the same trouble pulling that trigger. I mean, it's a lot tougher when it's actually your choice than when you're looking through them, without having to figure out who you're going to play. At the same time, I will say that in making these starts and sits, it does bring some clarity, I feel, to me as a player when I'm unsure about making those changes, because I've already gone through and I've looked at these players, comparing them without taking into account my actual team. And so then if I come down to a decision like this, it feels easier to me to make that move. Now, I guess the question for you, Blue Crew, if you want to hit me back, what's your record right now? Is this a make or break week for you? Does a loss effectively knock you out, or are you making a run where you're like first or second right now in your league with a good shot of making the playoffs and a chance to be like the top guy? I think that if that's the case, then, I think, let's put it this way. Either way, I like Claypool over Thielen this week. I will say that. Again, these are my opinions. Trust your gut. You know your roster better than anybody else. I can certainly say that Thielen has been a guy that I have a difficult time figuring out when he's going to have big games and when he's not. I just think that Minnesota offense is just tough to figure out. But looking at it strictly from a matchup standpoint and strictly from the idea that Minnesota has not been passing the ball at all, basically, since Dalvin Cook returned. Chicago is a tough defense either way, especially tough in the secondary. The Bengals are not. To me, like I would have a hard time now. Again, I don't have Adam Thielen as a player that I did not draft this year. I think there was concerns for me, and I even know that in one of my drafts, he was falling, and I think there was an opportunity where he had fallen well below really his value, and I still so I can't say that's a guy I'm high on. I certainly know he's played well at times this year. I'm going to call him back up again just to take a look, and I see your response there. I will put that up on the screen shortly, but yeah, obviously he's had. Now I'm looking at a half-point PPR setup right here. So if you're playing PPR, I don't remember if you said it was half-point PPR. Let me scroll and see if I can see that. Yeah, you said half-point. So in terms of half-point PPR, Thielen has had 3 games over 20 points this year, 2 games over 10, and then he's had 3 games where he's only scored 4. His targets have not been very consistent, to tell you the truth. We've seen the same thing with Justin Jefferson, too, as a receiver there. This just concerns me, this game. Let me see. Oops, I'm sorry, Tyler. I'll get to you in a minute. I was going to try to put up Blue Crew's next. You say 5th place, must win 4 and 5. 2nd place through 9th, only separated by 1 game. And then your other follow-up says, I'm up 6 points. Going into tomorrow, my opponent already played Corey Davis. Is there anything in that matchup that would sway you in terms of making this decision? Is there any other players in common between teams? Are you perhaps playing someone who rosters an Allen Robinson, or are you playing somebody who, there is no David Montgomery anymore, but is there anything else in that matchup? I don't expect that anybody's starting Nick Foles there or Kirk Cousins, really, provided it's a standard league, and you said it is. I definitely understand where you're coming from. I will say this: go with your gut. There's nothing worse than taking a player out of your lineup and seeing him have a big game. To me, I think that Claypool is a better start than Adam Thielen this week. But yeah, obviously, Adam Thielen is a guy you drafted high, and you look to lean on him in spots like this when you have must wins. So I definitely understand. I will say that's probably the best I can say is trust your gut. But to me, I think that the matchup for sure, if you take out of the equation whether or not which one you're going to pick, the matchup for sure favors Chase Claypool in this game. And he has been getting decent volume. Like I said, the last 2 games, 9 targets each of the last 2 weeks, 13 last week. Adam Thielen had 9 targets in the last 2 games combined at this point. So, let us know how again, thank you for being back. I'm interested to know. And again, I will be watching the games tomorrow, and after these live streams, I have a tendency to watch through games and kind of see what your guys' questions, how they panned out, even as much as watching my own players. So by all means, let us know how it worked out. And you say, thank you, sir. And I say, no, thank you for being here. Obviously, you guys that are here on the live stream and in these chats, this is why we're here. We're a brand new channel. We're continuing to grow, but we appreciate all you guys that are with us. We know it's tougher to find us right now because we don't necessarily come up in searches quite as high. But, as we continue to grow, if any of you guys that are new on the stream or if you're watching on replay, please click that subscribe button. Make sure you get those notifications for when we have new content. And, also we still have our goal of 100 new subscribers. So we definitely appreciate you helping us reach that goal. Good luck with that Blue Crew. I hope whichever guy you go with, I hope they crush it tomorrow. All right, couple here. I told you, Tyler, you were next. So let me get up here for your chat. And there it is. Tyler Smitherman, you look like a new viewer to the stream. So welcome, Tyler. Glad to have you with us. You're asking Jerry Jeudy or Brandon Cooks. And I see a follow-up here. It says two. Okay, even better. Jeudy, Fulgham, Cooks. To me, I don't think any one of these are bad choices. Let me take a look at who they're playing. Let's see. Denver is at Las Vegas. We've got New York Giants is the defense against Philadelphia for Fulgham, and Brandon Cooks playing against Houston. I would say Cooks is my first pick here. I have, in one of my personal leagues, I have been trying for the past couple of days, or most of the day, at least today, to decide between Brandon Cooks, and actually I'm considering starting him over Tyler Lockett tomorrow, even though Lockett is a top player playing against the Rams. So that's how much I actually like Cooks tomorrow. I think his target share has gone up. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call up each of these players for you, and I'm going to give you an exact number on where they're at. So Cooks against Cleveland. Cleveland is allowing the 5th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Jerry Jeudy, I suspect it's a little bit lower for him. Las Vegas, yep, they're somewhere in the middle. They're giving up the 17th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. The upside with Jeudy is that I don't know if you have a full complement of receivers for Denver tomorrow. I'll have to look that up. I'm not sure. I think KJ Hamler is back. Not sure about Patrick, and I'm not sure if Fant is still looking at an injury there. And then the other guy you had there is Fulgham, who I will say, even before I look it up, is my gut says him. Playing against the Giants. The Giants are allowing the 10th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. So my gut says of those three, I like Cooks and I like Fulgham. Now, as we talk this through, the difference here with Fulgham is that you would expect Philadelphia to have some more players back tomorrow. Jalen Reagor, Dallas Goedert. I've heard Alshon Jeffrey, although I'll believe it when I see it because they've said many times this year they thought he was going to be back and he wasn't. Let's see what time these games are. The Cleveland game is 10 a.m. Philadelphia game is 10 a.m. and the Denver game is a late game. Sorry, not 10 a.m. on the West Coast, a 1 o'clock game. Denver and Vegas is at 4. So it's a decision you're probably going to have to make before the game starts. I don't necessarily think that any one of these three is a bad choice for you. So, go with your gut, and I don't feel like any of them is necessarily wrong. Matchup-wise, Cooks and Fulgham have the better of the matchups, and for me, gut-wise, Fulgham has been very good and has been seeing so many targets that until you see that change, you have to assume that he's going to continue to see that. Let me just call up Cooks and ease your mind here, because Brandon Cooks has been a player that's, to me, been a little bit cautious because he got off to such a slow start this season. However, in the last 4 games that Houston has played, targets for Cooks, starting with week 5, 12 targets, 9 targets, 9 targets, 9 targets, and catches in those games in order 8, 9, 7, and 3. So he did have fewer catches last game. He did still return a touchdown. He has had a touchdown in 3 of those 4 games. And I'm looking at a half-point PPR screen in front of me. He has been 15 or more fantasy points in 3 of those 4 games in a half-point PPR format. Not sure if you're playing PPR. If you are, it's been even a little bit better. I'm going to look up Jerry Jeudy's numbers for comparison, just to try to help you out with that. It does say Jerry Jeudy is listed as questionable for tomorrow, if that makes a difference. It does say Vic Fangio said he expects Jeudy to play. Wow, okay. So, again, Judy's not a player that I have in my lineups, but target-wise, the last 2 weeks, week 8 against the Chargers, 10 targets. Last week against Atlanta, 14 targets. 4 catches against LA, 73 yards. 7 catches against Atlanta, 125 yards and a touchdown. Yeah, that kind of just backs it up that I don't see where any of those 3 is a bad choice to me. I say go with your gut. For me, I probably end up picking, again, I don't have Jeudy on any of my lineups, so it's a player I'm a little bit less familiar with than some others. I'd probably go with Cooks and Fulgham. But I don't think you can go wrong with any of these three. So for sure, non-PPR league, I see is what you say here. Yeah, same kind of deal. To me, that might perhaps, because of the targets being more for Jerry Jeudy, perhaps you trust. I didn't look up Fulgham for you, so let me do that real quick, just to talk about the targets. Of course, not coming up for me. I'll give it a shot again. All right, well, let's try this another way. It's not cooperating, so let me just go to Philadelphia's roster. Travis Fulgham. All right, here we go. Last 4 games, targets in order 13, 10, 11, 7. Catches in order 10, 6, 5, 6. He's had a touchdown in 3 out of 4. He's actually had a touchdown in 4 of his last 5. It does say Jeffrey could return. We do know Jalen Reagor's coming back. We do know Dallas Goedert is back. So, yeah, this is kind of why I'm saying it. Like, I like Fulgham. I think until he shows you anything different, you stick with him because he's been that good. I think Cooks is my first pick out of those 3, but Jeudy certainly has been good as well. So, perhaps me saying going with your gut isn't tremendous help because, you probably, if you're asking that question, you were already kind of conflicted in the first place. But I like Cooks. I like Fulgham, but I don't think you can go wrong with any 3. So, by all means, stop back and let us know how I'll be keeping an eye on these games tomorrow and checking it out. But, yeah, hopefully whichever of those 2 guys, again, that you go with, as always, hopefully they crush it. But we appreciate you being here, Tyler. It does look like you're a new viewer to the stream. Please, if you have not done so yet, click that subscribe button. Make sure you get those notifications so that you know whenever we have new content coming out. That's the most important thing because I know that, being that we're a new channel, we don't necessarily always come up as high in the searches. So we appreciate all your viewers, and we want you to be alerted whenever we have new stuff. And thank you, Tyler, for being here. All right, let me put this back up for a minute. We will remind everybody that we are here for live chat throughout the entire show. And Tyler, and I'll put yours back up real quick. You said thank you. We'll for sure be back. Again, no thank you. Without you guys here, this is what we want to do. We want to have chat. We want to talk fantasy football. That's what we love to do. So without you guys here, we can't do that. I can present a lot of content, but at the end of the day, I'm just kind of talking, and you guys are just kind of listening. So we'd love to have you guys in the chat. And you said got my subscribe, so thank you for the sub. We appreciate it, and we'll see you again on future shows. And for those of you who are still watching on the live stream, or for those of you who are watching on replay, please feel free to drop a comment below. If you're live, we have our live chat open. We'll be here for a little bit still tonight. I don't know what time it is. It's just about 1 o'clock on the East Coast here. We're still going. We got some more content of our own to go through. We're here for your live chat throughout the show. So no matter if we're talking about anything else, go ahead and pop in with your question, and we will get to them. Again, that's what we're here for, is to try to go through that live chat and content as well. But for sure, if you got any questions, glad to talk through that stuff. So I believe we got through all the quarterbacks as far as the Saturday stars. So that brings us to the tight end spot next. Let me get through to my tight end information. Looking at top matchups for tomorrow, I've got Eric Ebron at the tight end spot as a top matchup tomorrow for the Pittsburgh Steelers, playing against the Cincinnati Bengals. That game is in Pittsburgh, and the Bengals are allowing the second most fantasy points to the tight end spot. Ebron, 1 touchdown in each of his last 2 games. And as far as Cincinnati goes, they've given up 10 or more fantasy points to tight ends 6 times this year. I think this is a great spot for Ebron. I've been talking about him for a while. As a top streamer at the tight end position, perhaps you have to fill up buys this week. Not sure again what buys we would be. That might be, well, for sure. Travis Kelce, you're filling his spot. Perhaps Hayden Hurst, you're filling a spot there. Dalton Schultz, if you're playing, it's so bad I don't even remember who the tight end for the Jets is. Chris Herndon. Yeah, there's a reason why I forgot, because he plays for the Jets. Anyway, Eric Ebron I've got as a top matchup for tomorrow. I think he's in a great spot. I like this matchup against Cincinnati. I think Cincinnati is going to struggle against the pass. I like Eric Ebron as a Saturday star. Another guy that I've got as a top matchup for tomorrow is Evan Ingram. Every time I have to talk about Evan Ingram as a star, this is the way I feel. I have Evan Ingram in some spots this year, purely because during the draft I didn't get the guys I wanted. I'll say that candidly. I have struggled with this guy so much over the years. It just feels like he should play so well and should have so many good matchups, and then just doesn't seem to be there. So what do? I sit him. He plays well for a couple of weeks. I have to start him again, and then he doesn't show up. Just a rough guy. But at any rate, for tomorrow, playing the Eagles, this is a good matchup. Philadelphia allowing the 4th most fantasy points to the tight end spot. They've given up 10 or more fantasy points to 6 different tight ends this year. They've actually given up 28 or more fantasy points twice to tight ends this year. Ebron in week 7 against Philadelphia had 10.9 fantasy points, and he has had 9 or more targets each of the last 3 games. So, of course, I'm going to probably have Everett Ingram as one of my starts tomorrow on the top 5 starts and sits. I'll put him in my lineup. He'll have 5 targets. He'll catch 1 ball and fumble, and that'll be the day. So that's probably the way it goes with Everett Ingram. That's how I feel. Nonetheless, his matchup is there, so we have to talk about it. He is one of the top matchups for tight ends tomorrow. All right, this next guy is a guy I feel way more comfortable with at the tight end spot, and definitely deserving of being a Saturday star, and that is the Hawk, TJ Hawkinson for the Detroit Lions. Tomorrow playing against the Washington football team, and Washington, although their defense has been good, they are allowing the 6th most fantasy points to the tight end spot. They have given up 10 or more fantasy points to 4 tight ends this year, and they have allowed 6 touchdowns to tight ends throughout this season. Hawkinson, a touchdown in 4 of his last 5 games, and he has had 10 or more fantasy points in 6 of his 8 games this year. I really feel like there are very few tight ends in fantasy football that you can count on a week in, week out basis. I'm not sure that you can say that there's more than 4. Obviously, one of them is out, George Kittle. Travis Kelce is one of them. I feel like Darren Waller is one of them. And I feel like TJ Hawkinson is right there at this point. I wish that I had him on some lineups. I wasn't able to get him on any of my rosters this year. He has been very good he's had good matchups, bad matchups, seems to still produce. You've got no Kenny Golladay for the Lions this week. Washington's tough to wide receivers, which means you're going to have a better chance of that tight end getting some work in there. I like Hawkinson. He's going to be my top start on tomorrow's start sits on our Sunday pregame show. So definitely a top matchup and definitely worthy of being a Saturday star / Sunday star. I know we're already in Sunday morning at this point. But TJ Hawkinson, a great matchup tomorrow. Again, staying at the tight end spot, another one of our Saturday stars is Mike Gesicki, another player to me that's been very hit or miss this year. Tomorrow playing against the Los Angeles Chargers, they are allowing the 8th most fantasy points to the tight ends. So the matchup is there. Also do like this matchup for Tua Tagovailoa this week. So that gives you a little bit more confidence in Gesicki. In terms of LA, they have allowed 6 touchdowns to tight ends this year. They have given up 10 or more fantasy points to the tight end spot 5 times. Gesicki has had 10 or more fantasy points in only 2 games this season. So this is a non-confident start for sure. However, the tight end spot is tough, and perhaps you need to fill that spot that Travis Kelce is not there this week or any of the other buys. It's a good matchup. It's going to be one of those nail biters by all means, but sometimes you just got to trust that matchup, and that might be the situation here. So Mike Gesicki, one of the Saturday stars at the tight end spot. And the next guy at the tight end spot, this one I like. Obviously still some concerns here in a different way, but it's Austin Hooper for the Cleveland Browns playing against the Houston Texans. This game is in Cleveland. Houston is allowing the 10th most fantasy points to the tight end spot. They have allowed 4 touchdowns to tight ends this year. Hooper now returning from injury, so he hasn't played in a little bit. But in each of his last 3 games where he did play, he had 5 catches in all of those games. You now have, obviously, no Odell Beckham for the Browns. I think this is a decent chance for Hooper to get a lot of targets, at least a bump up from where he was. And again, it's a good matchup. So therefore, you've got a reasonable chance for Austin Hooper to turn in a nice game at the tight end spot for the Cleveland Browns. So I've got him as a Saturday star, one of the top matchups for Week 10 in fantasy football tomorrow. All right, that's our run of players at the top matchup spot. So let's get up another quick promo for you guys. And we'll remind you that at TFF Live Sunday pregame show, this is our main show. Tonight's was kind of an impromptu Saturday night show / Sunday morning show. But our main show is tomorrow / later today at 12 noon Eastern time. We are on taking you right until game time. We go through all your information and answer your fantasy football questions in chat, as always, getting you ready for your matchups each week. And again, we'll show you more information about us. We are the Fantasy Follow. We are a brand new channel. We thank you for finding us on YouTube. If you have not done so, please go ahead and subscribe to our channel so that you can get those notifications. Like I said, as a new channel, we're a little bit harder to find. We don't necessarily come up as high in those searches. So we do appreciate you being with us. And we want to make sure you get notifications when we have more content, just like we did tonight. And we thank those of you that are back with us that are regulars, obviously, that got those. You can find us on Twitter at The Fantasy Follow, and that's spelled Fantasy, spelled FNTSY. You can send your fantasy football questions to our Twitter account during the week using the hashtag AskTFFLive, and we will answer those questions live on our Sunday pregame show. Facebook / The Fantasy Follow, and our website, thefantasyfollow.com. All right, let's put back up our chat reminder for all of you, and we'll leave this up throughout the rest of this next part of the show. Reminding you that our live chat is open. We are here for you guys. If you have fantasy football questions about your lineups or even about trades, since the trade deadline is, for most leagues, is in a couple of hours now, midnight West Coast time, and it is currently 1 o'clock East Coast. So you've got a little bit of time. Perhaps you have a trade sitting there. You're waiting to say yes or no, and you're not sure. Or, perhaps you have that person in your league that you can make an offer to at this late time and still have a chance at it. We got all that for you. So let me go through. And what I've done here is I have a set of players that I have put up on my little deal here as potential trade players to talk about. And we'll go through these guys with you for the next little bit. And like I said, anytime you have, if you jump on the chat and we're talking about something else, feel free to ask your question. We want to get to those chats right away. So whatever else we're doing, we'll leave that and we'll get to your chat questions. All right, let's talk about potential trade players. I've got some players that I've noted here. I don't have graphics up on the screen, but I will go through a rundown of a couple of players that I think are potentials for you to think about. Perhaps you are not in a Yahoo league. If you're on another platform that might have a later trade deadline, these are still in play for you. The first guy that I talk about here is James Robinson for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And you might say, well, wait a minute, James Robinson. Like, James Robinson has been awesome this year. Why would I trade him? Like, nobody's going to trade him to me. Like, that's crazy. Here's the deal with Robinson. So if you're in a situation where you are in a very good spot with your roster, and you're in a very good spot to make this, when thinking about these trades this late in the year, you start to think about the matchups when you get to your fantasy football playoffs. And that's usually week 14, 15, 16, possibly 17 for you, but most people not. So with James Robinson, this is what makes him a player worth talking about during these trade talks. His playoff matchups are not in week 14 playing the Tennessee Titans. That's a decent matchup, the 8th most fantasy points to the running back spot. However, in week 15, right in the heart of your fantasy playoffs, Jacksonville plays Baltimore, giving up the 4th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. In week 16 for your fantasy football championship, the Jacksonville Jaguars played the Chicago Bears, currently giving up the 11th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. So, since James Robinson has been so good this year, are you in a spot where, thinking about your playoffs, if you have a wealth at the running back spot and perhaps need at the wide receiver spot, is this somebody that you could turn into a player that will help you during those playoff weeks? Something to think about. It would be awful tough for me to trade away James Robinson. I don't know that I could do it. I guess it depends on what. But again, this is just, I'm not here to say trade him or don't trade him. I'm just kind of taking a look at these players and why they should come up in this conversation. And I feel like James Robinson actually should come up in this conversation at this point. Another guy we'll talk about here, a wide receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles. We already talked about him a little tonight, and that is Travis Fulgham from the Philadelphia Eagles. Is he a player that is possibly a sell high at this point? Definitely he has had a great year. However, Philadelphia has had so many players out to injury. You're going to look at Jalen Reagor coming back, at some point, they keep saying Alshon Jeffrey's going to play. I'll believe it when I see it. Dallas Goedert coming back. Miles Sanders now coming back. So will that change? We'll say this. The matchups coming up for Fulgham before the playoffs, it's green across the board on Yahoo. This week, the Giants allowing the 10th most, 2 wide receivers, then Cleveland the 5th most, then Seattle the most. So the next weeks are great matchups. When you get to the playoffs, it's New Orleans in week 14, 14th most, Arizona in week 15, 15th most, and Dallas in week 16, 6th most. Matchups are there. The question is there going to be a change in Fulgham's volume? And this is, to me, one of the tough spots in fantasy football is how do you judge what's about to happen next? You have to figure he is not necessarily going to receive the extreme volume that he has up to this point. That makes him a consideration to possibly shop. Or, if you like those matchups, it could go the other way. But to me, I think if you have him, it's a consideration to possibly go ahead and see if you can get somebody back for him at this point. Maybe package him with another player and see what you can get. Here's another guy that I like as someone to go out and get right now. That's Terry McLaurin from the Washington football team. McLaurin has been decent this year. He's been a little bit up and down because that offense in Washington a little bit hit or miss. I think that, provide obviously Alex Smith at quarterback now, the awful injury that he suffered, knock on wood, let's hope that there are no issues with that. But to me, if Alex Smith is your quarterback for the rest of the year, that is stability for that offense that you haven't necessarily seen in the past with Dwayne Haskins or even Kyle Allen. You take a look at I'm looking at a half-point PPR format here. So his points have been up and down, 8, 22, 10, 16, 4, 10, 18. So 21, he's been up and down, but his targets have been there all along. He's had touchdowns now in each of the last 2 games. I do like him going forward. His run in the playoffs is decent. You got the 49ers in week 14, but then you got Seattle in week 15, giving up the most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. And week 16 for your fantasy football championship is Carolina, the 7th fewest. Again, to me, Carolina is a weird team because they're not necessarily a defense that you think that scares you. But yet to the wide receiver spot, they haven't been great. I feel it's just more about the fact that they've been poor against the run. So I like Terry McLaurin as a player to go out and see if you can possibly pick him up and add him to your roster moving forward, whether that be at the trade deadline now or if you're on another platform where your trade deadline is a little farther off. All right, let's talk about another player at the wide receiver spot, and that is Chase Claypool. Another interesting spot here. Claypool has been very good the last 2 weeks, 9 and 13 targets. I expect him to have a very good game tomorrow against Cincinnati. I will have him as one of my top 5 starts on tomorrow's show. The deal with Claypool is there are a lot of mouths to feed in Pittsburgh, and it's tough to get him in that lineup and be sure that he's going to see volume. Beyond that, his run of games is not great moving forward. Next week, Jacksonville, decent. After that, you got Baltimore, 5th fewest. Washington, fewest. Buffalo, 8th fewest. That's in week 14. Now in week 15, it's back against Cincinnati, but they are the 16th fewest. They're right in the middle, but right now their secondary is banged up. Week 16, Indianapolis Colts, tough on defense this year, 11th fewest. Chase Claypool is an interesting player to me to shop at this point for that reason. If you are in that spot where you are in good shape for your fantasy football playoffs, and you perhaps have a lot of other players at the wide receiver spot, you might not even be starting Claypool in a lot of those weeks. So if you perhaps think that you're not going to start him against a Baltimore, against a Washington, against a Buffalo, then why not shop him and get somebody back that potentially has a nicer matchup? And I will tell you, there are a couple of more players that I have on this list that I love their matchups. And specifically for the Cincinnati Bengals, I think either of these 2 players is a tremendous player to target as a trade. And those 2 that I'm talking about are Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins. I think both of those players have played well this year. I really like Tyler Boyd, and to me, he's definitely a player I know that I have even tried to go out and get as a trade target. The volume in that passing game has been there all year long. I don't expect that to change. Cincinnati is not a team that's going to be playing a lot of games from ahead where they're just going to run the ball. Joe Mixon has been hurt anyway. You would expect he comes back at some point. But you take a look at Boyd's production, 8 or more targets in all but 2 games this year. I'm sorry, in all but 3, 7 or more targets in all but 2. Last 3 weeks, 13 targets, 7 targets, a touchdown in each of them. if you look at the playoff matchups for Cincinnati, in week 14, it is Dallas Cowboys. We know where they're at. They're giving up the 6th most currently to the wide receiver spot. And then Pittsburgh Steelers in week 15, which, most people might not realize. I know I have to do a double take most times. They're actually giving up the 9th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. They're so tough to run it on. You're going to have to throw it. And also they're going to be ahead of you a lot of time. Certainly you think they're going to be ahead of Cincinnati most of the time in those matchups. They're going to have to throw the ball to try to play from behind. And then in week 16, playing the Houston Texans, currently giving up the 7th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. So to me, Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins are both players that fit this mold of players that you can go out and try to pick up as a trade target. Look at T. Higgins' volume. He has had, 8 or more targets in 3 of the last 4 games. He has, in a half-point PPR format, only been under 10 points twice, with the exception of the game that he didn't miss. That was week 1. He has not necessarily had the volume of touchdowns. He's had 3 this season, 1 in week 7, 2 in week 3. However, you're not going to need to give up as much to get back a T. Higgins as a potential trade. I think that's definitely a player that you can look for. And due to those matchups in your playoff weeks, makes him very valuable to your team, even if you don't play him leading up to them. And even if he's not one of your top starters, to have him sitting there on your roster, protection against injuries, and know that you have good matchups down the end of the season, I think makes him very valuable. So I like T. Higgins a lot as a player to look at. All right, sliding back over to the running back spot, we'll take a look at a couple of other guys. And this next one is Antonio Gibson, who I think is a player that is worth talking about right now in terms of trades, no matter which way they are. Gibson has been pretty good this year. A little bit of a surprise. You probably drafted him late or perhaps picked him up off the waiver wire in one of the early weeks in the season. But Gibson has had touchdowns in each of his last 2 games. Now he's had touchdowns in 5 of his 8 games overall. I'm looking at a half-point PPR screen where he's had the last 2 weeks 18.8 and 11 fantasy points. What I think is interesting about Antonio Gibson at this point is what is going to happen going forward without Smith and J.D. McKissic. We've seen, this is the interesting part, we've seen in the 2 games that Smith has played, 22 targets to J.D. McKissic. It's not just the targets. Clearly, McKissic has to be on the field. And that means that, they are bringing him in over Gibson as kind of, to me, a safety valve for Alex Smith to make sure that he has an option to get the ball out of his hands quickly. Again, this is Alex Smith, the player that they want to make sure that they continue to keep healthy. Clearly the awful injury that he had last year, that is very reasonable to do so. So what does that mean for Antonio Gibson's volume for the rest of this season? Will he continue to see what you need to see to get that volume? Or is this going to be enough of a split that he perhaps doesn't have quite as much value as he did? If that is the case, that makes him a sell high candidate right now. He potentially, is he going to stay where he is? I think he has a lot of decent games coming up. I think he's going to play very well this week. I have him as a start this week against the Lions. He's got a lot of green on the board left on Yahoo as you look at the matchups. Taking a look at his playoff matchups in week 14, the 49ers currently allowing the fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. In week 15, Seattle, the 13th fewest to the running back spot. Obviously, Seattle's going to give up points. He's going to fall into the end zone at times, but clearly it's going more to the receivers in those games. And then week 16 for your fantasy football championship, playing Carolina, giving up the 5th most fantasy points to the running back spot. So this is kind of an up and down deal here. A good, a bad, and a middle. What does that mean? Is Gibson a player that you look at? It's certainly someone that you can think about. And the reason why we talk about him here is because who knows what can happen. I know that I will say that Gibson is a player that I have actually traded away this year and gotten some nice return for. So there's definitely, I feel, volume there, and I feel that there's volume there and value there for the person who acquires him. I don't think that you're offering them a bad deal with Antonio Gibson. He's certainly been a valuable player this year. I think I want to say he's in the top 20 at the RB spot. I don't have it up on my screen right now, so I can't say for sure. But the player worth talking about here for sure. And another guy at that running back spot is DeAndre Swift. His production has been up and down this year because that committee in Detroit has been very difficult to predict with Adrian Peterson and now with Kerryon Johnson working his way back into the mix. DeAndre Swift, here's what we have for his numbers in terms of rushes the last 4 games. 14 rushes, 9 rushes, 6 rushes, 13 rushes. up and down. He had 116 yards, 2 touchdowns in week 6. And in week 8, he had 1 yard rushing. I mean, clearly they're going to use Smith as a pass catcher some of the time also. He should have goal line touches, but it's a player that's questionable. You know, if you had to make that choice to put him in your lineup and you needed that win, would you be able to make that choice? I'm looking at a half-point PPR screen. He's been over 10 4 of the last 5 games, but then he had that one real stinker in week 8. Now, his run in the playoffs is not bad, actually. Week 14, Green Bay allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to the running back spot. Week 15, Tennessee, the 8th most to the running back spot. 16, a little tougher, is Tampa Bay, the 12th fewest. So again, is DeAndre Swift somebody who is at a high point in terms of his value for this season that you could turn around if you wanted to look elsewhere? I think that's a possibility. At the same time, I don't hate DeAndre Swift on your lineup. So to me, if there's somebody that's in that spot where you can see either way, that makes him a possibility for trades on both sides. You know, and not necessarily a lopsided trade. You know, you could still have good value going both ways. So DeAndre Swift is a name I think worth talking about here. Another running back is Todd Gurley. This one's a little tougher to me. I don't know that you're going to have to offer more to get a Todd Gurley back in a trade. He's been seeing a lot of the volume. I think he's going to continue to see a lot of the volume in terms of the running back in Atlanta. Clearly, they're a passing team, but clearly they're going to be in goal line situations quite a bit, and he's going to have those opportunities. And you can see that from his production. He has 9 rushing touchdowns this year. In the last 3 games, 4 total rushing touchdowns. So the volume is there. The production is there. His fantasy playoffs in week 14, the Chargers allowing the 12th most fantasy points to the running back spot. In week 15, the Bucks, 12th fewest. And in week 16, the Kansas City Chiefs allowing the 10th most. They've been more vulnerable to the run. So not bad there for Gurley. Decent little run of games. Might be a little bit trickier to pull a trade off there. Here's another player that might be, I don't know if less tricky to me, Ezekiel Elliott. Question mark in Dallas at this point. Is this a buy low candidate? Certainly the name value is there. There's certainly enough reason to try to go out and see if you can get this guy off of another person's roster and perhaps he turns it around. But in this, I'm looking at, again, a half-point PPR screen. He hasn't broken 10 fantasy points in the last 4 games. Clearly the quarterback situation is up in the air there. He's been a little banged up. You would expect Zeke to turn it around. It'd be surprising if he doesn't. But, you know, this is, again, a situation where I wouldn't be surprised if Elliott is a guy that's being traded a lot right now in leagues. His playoff run in week 14, they play the Bengals. Very good matchup. 9th most fantasy points to running backs. Week 15, the 49ers. The fewest fantasy points to running backs. Week 16, the Eagles. The 9th fewest fantasy points to running backs. So not great, especially when it comes to 15 and 16. Does that mean that you don't mind shipping him off if somebody else makes you a decent offer? Potentially. Again, I think these are the reasons why Elliott is a guy that you've probably been seeing in a lot of trade discussion right now. And I will mention one more running back here, and that's Austin Eckler. Eckler hasn't played in so long. It appears that he's on his way back. They still have him slated for projected zeros on Yahoo all the way up through week 13 is the first week they haven't projected to have any points back. I don't know that it might be sooner than that. We did see a tweet from him this week that he's getting come back. To me, I think Austin Eckler is a guy that you could potentially go out and try to make a run for. I think he's going to have value when he comes back for sure. They've lost Justin Jackson in their backfield now. They really have struggled to find running backs there to fill it. The run in the playoff rounds for Eckler in week 14, Atlanta Falcons, 6th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. However, Falcons games typically high scoring, so potentially not as big of a concern. In week 15, the Raiders giving up the 4th most fantasy points to running backs. In week 16, the Broncos, the 8th fewest fantasy points to running backs. So that's the playoff run for Eckler. If that's a guy that you're going to think about targeting as a potential trade, he's out there. It's worth taking a look at. And before we go through, we got a few more wide receivers to take a look at as potential trade talks. We'll remind you again, we are here for your live chat. We're here all show answering your fantasy football questions as well. Tomorrow is the TFF Live Sunday pregame show starting at 12 noon. We are here all the way up until game time, taking your fantasy football questions and getting you ready for your matchups each week. And also, we'll put our information back up on the screen. For us, we are the Fantasy Follow. We are a brand new channel here on YouTube. If you're streaming with us live or if you've been with us in the past, we appreciate you being here. If you're a new viewer, please be sure to hit that subscribe button and make sure that you are able to get those notifications when we have new content. We are a new channel, so we are not necessarily quite as easy to find. We want to make sure that you guys are alerted whenever we have new stuff for you. And also, you can Twitter at the Fantasy Follow, and that's spelled fantasy spelled FNTSY. And you can send us your fantasy football questions on Twitter during the week using the hashtag AskTFFLive, and we will answer those questions live on our Sunday show. All right, our chat remains open. We're going to be here for a little while more. We'll go through a little bit the rest of our stuff. If any of you have questions for us, feel free to jump in the chat. We have a little bit more content to go through. Glad to take any fantasy football questions that you have. We love talking fantasy, and that's what our show is all about. So even if we're talking about something else, don't hesitate, drop us a question, and we'll get to those chats. A couple more players to take a look at in terms of potential trade players. This next wide receiver is Amari Cooper from the Dallas Cowboys. What do you do with Amari Cooper right now? Tempting if you've had him, if he's somebody that you think you can get back value for. Do you try to trade him away at this point? It's hard to say what that quarterback situation is going to continue to look like, and it's also hard to say what you can get back for an Amari Cooper. But at any rate, if you look at the run of games in the playoffs, in Week 14 playing the Bengals, 16th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. Week 15 playing the 49ers, 15th fewest to the wide receivers. And 16 playing the Eagles. They are 14th fewest to the wide receivers. Not great matchups in the playoffs. A little bit of a struggle. Is Cooper somebody that you would potentially trade away and take back a little bit less on your team? You know, is something like an Amari Cooper for T. Higgins? Would you go that low? T. Higgins, obviously not. You'd probably be able to get him for that guy. Would you be able to get a Tyler Boyd? I don't know. It might be closer. But this is a guy worth talking about. Another guy in that same realm, I think, is Mike Evans right now for Tampa Bay. I'm extremely concerned with Mike Evans. His value has been fluctuating severely this year based on who else was in that lineup. With Chris Godwin coming back and with Antonio Brown now, I expect Evans to be, at best, hit or miss. And that's at best. I'm very concerned with his production moving forward. I have tried to make efforts where I have had him in spots to see if I can move him. I don't know that that's going to work out. It's tough. I don't know that anybody wants Mike Evans right now. Very shaky to me. I feel like this is Tom Brady's team. I feel like he wants his guys. You know, Gronk is there now. You know, Fournette came in. Antonio Brown came in. He seems to like Godwin. You've seen him like Scotty Miller. I don't know that he's really shown that Mike Evans is his guy to throw to. And so with all those mouths to feed, do you imagine that Brady wants to look his way? And is that the type of player that is going to flourish with TB12 under center? I don't know. I think if Evans is a guy you can get something for, I feel like he's a guy that is worth moving at this point. It's just really tough. I'm very concerned with Mike Evans, so that's why I talk about him as potential trade talks. All right, let's see who else we have for receivers here. I got Brandon Cooks down here. I think Cooks is on an uptick. I think there are a lot of players who will be concerned with Brandon Cooks' value at this point. And I definitely think that means that somebody you might be able to get, a possible – it's not – I can't call it a buy low because he's played well lately, but he got off to such a shaky start with Houston. There's obviously a lot of concerns there. But I do think that Brandon Cooks is a player that you could potentially get back if you're looking to trade away someone like – I mean, I don't know. Would you give away Mike Evans for Brandon Cooks? It's hard to say. But when we look at his playoff run here, I do see a comment here. I'll get to that real quick next. And I haven't looked up yet to see what that is. But in Week 14 for Cooks, Chicago, third fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. In Week 15, Indianapolis, 11th fewest. Colts have been tough. In Week 16, Cincinnati Bengals, 16th fewest. Not a great run. So potentially that makes a difference in whether or not you're going to go out and try to target Brandon Cooks in terms of bringing him in for a trade. Or it might make a difference if Brandon Cooks is a guy that you think you can shop to somebody else. Either way, someone worth talking about. Let me check over here with the comments and see what we got. And I see a question here from Rojas TM. I hope I pronounced that right, Rojas. And thank you for being here. Glad to have you on the stream. And your question is Travis Fulgham or Brandon Ayuk, full PPR flex. Let me take a look at these two players and see what their matchups are. We'll start with Fulgham because I have him up on screen right now. Playing the New York Giants. The Giants give up the 10th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. So good matchup there for Fulgham. Let me see what we got here for first. Let's see who San Francisco is playing. They are in the 4 o'clock game against New Orleans. I believe New Orleans is middle of the ground. Let me just call up Ayuk. Spell it right, and I'll have a better chance of actually getting his information on the screen. So New Orleans currently allowing the 14th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. That being said, let me check on his reports here. I don't believe Deebo Samuel is slated to play in this game. Doesn't really say, but I don't believe that he is. You've got no George Kittle there. Looks like they're going to turn to Jordan Reed at the tight end spot. Brandon Ayuk, to me, is going to remain the top player to go to as a wide receiver in that offense this week, at least. The matchup is not that bad against New Orleans. Again, the 14th most to the wide receiver spot. And as I said with Fulgham, I believe I said the 10th most. So, you're only talking, I'm going to call it back up again just to take a look. You're only talking about a 4-spot difference between the two. So not huge, even though you're going to see Fulgham show up in, if I can find him, Fulgham's going to show up in green if you're a Yahoo player for sure. There he is against the Giants, 10th most. I think it's a toss-up. I think this is one of those go with your gut deals. I like Ayuk if I had to pick one of these two, for the fact that I believe that you've got a better chance of feeling comfortable of him getting the volume in this game. Fulgham should get the volume because he's played so well. However, Philadelphia looks like Jalen Reagor is going to be back. Looks like Dallas Goedert's going to be back. There's talk about Alshon Jeffrey, and they're coming off a bye. So they've had the opportunity to – it's not like these guys are coming off of injury and right back into a game. They've had a week off where if any of these guys have been able to get in on practices, you would think they have a much full complement of players. Where does that leave Travis Fulgham? That's a little bit more of a question mark. I think we know where to expect Brandon Ayuk. There's been a lot of talk out of San Francisco, Coach Shanahan saying that Ayuk is a guy that they want to have heavily involved there, especially in PPR. I mean, obviously Fulgham has had the volume also, but my gut says Ayuk on this one. Again, with any of these decisions, I'll try to give you my best opinion, back it up with some information. At the end of the day, you guys, your rosters better than anybody, and sometimes you do just have those gut decisions to go. I'm trying to give you my input. I don't think a bad choice here is Brandon Ayuk. Appreciate Rojas being with us on the stream. You look like a new viewer of our show, so appreciate you being here. If you haven't done so, if you like what we got going on, please feel free to hit that subscribe button. We're a brand new channel, so we don't necessarily come up quite as high on searches. So we want to make sure that you can get notifications to let you know when there's new content out there that's available for you. And you say, thank you for your input. No, thank you. Again, without you guys in the chat, this is what we want to do. This is what we're here for, is to talk fantasy football. I mean, I can talk until I can't talk more about, trade potentials, but what we really like is we want to talk to you. We want to help you through these matchups and talk you through trades and whatever the case may be. That's what we're here for, and that's what the beauty of these channels is. So thank you for being here, and by all means, hope to see you on future shows. All right, we'll put this other notification back up. Let any of you out there that are on the stream know that we are continuing to answer your fantasy football questions all show. We got a little bit left tonight, even though we're about 1:30 on the East Coast, but that's okay. Our live chat stays open. We got a few more trade players that we haven't talked about here that I'd like to at least make note of for those of you that are watching live or watching on a replay, kind of give you things to think about with these players that are out there that you might want to go after, or you might want to try to bolster your roster in other ways. So a couple more wide receivers that we haven't talked about yet, and one of those guys is Allen Robinson from the Chicago Bears. Interesting situation in Chicago right now. Matt Nagy giving up play calling there. Will that change things in terms of Robinson's usage? His volume has been pretty good this year. He's had a couple of lower games in terms of targets recently, and he is popping up as questionable this week. And let me see what the report says here. It says he was limited in practice, expected to play. The deal in Chicago, first of all, this is a great matchup against the Vikings tomorrow. You would expect some real fantasy value for the wide receivers in this game for Chicago. That said, and with no David Montgomery, you would think that they're going to, look to the pass even more. That said, if Allen Robinson produces a big game this week, if your trade deadline has not passed, does that make him a trade away target on a sell high next week? This is what we like to talk about. Robinson's matchups in the playoffs. Week 14, Houston, 7th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Week 15, Minnesota, 2nd most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Week 16 for your fantasy football championship, Jacksonville, 13th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Matchups in the playoffs. Makes Allen Robinson a player potentially you might think perhaps you need to bolster your wide lineup. He has matchups there. There's nothing worse than making a trade, getting into your playoffs, and going for that championship and finding out that your guys are up against rough defenses. This is a nice run. So Allen Robinson is a player to take a look at in terms of potential trades. Here's another guy that I like to talk about. That's Tyler Lockett for the Seattle Seahawks. What do you do with Tyler Lockett right now? He has been, can you describe his boomer bust, a good, strong enough description for Tyler Lockett at this point? He's had 2 huge games, and then the last 2 weeks have been just, if you're depending on Tyler Lockett to be your number 1 or number 2 receiver, hopefully he turns that around. But this is not a great week this week against the Rams. I have been struggling with this decision personally for tomorrow's games because I expect Jalen Ramsey to take DK Metcalf in this game. Does that mean that Tyler Lockett gets the bulk of the volume? To me, that's very possible. But at the same time, if you look at the Rams stats, if you actually dig into the fantasy points they've allowed throughout the year, they've been really tough across the board. And I know that in one of my leagues, I have Tyler Lockett in one spot where Brandon Cooks playing Cleveland, which is a great matchup, is a potential flop where it's very difficult to me to move a guy like Lockett out of my lineup. Again, like I've talked about before, it's a lot easier when you do starts and sits and you don't actually have to make that call. It gets a lot more difficult when it's your own call. So I definitely understand when those of you come through with questions in the chat, like I can answer those questions, without having to actually make that call myself. And it makes it a lot easier for me to say, like earlier, like I did, Chase Claypool over Adam Thielen. Like if it was me on my team and I drafted Adam Thielen fairly high up, relatively in the draft, and Chase Claypool was somebody that I just picked up off the waiver wire, like, is it going to be easy for me to start Chase Claypool and leave Thielen sitting there? It's really easy for me to say when it's not my decision, but I can say that I have Claypool in a couple of spots this year, and that I'm going to have to finalize that decision before those games happen tomorrow. So this is a tough deal. Fantasy football, it's all about opinion. And sometimes it's kind of like poker. You just got to make the best decision you can and hope that the cards fall the right way. So Tyler Lockett, again, we'll take a look at his playoff run. In week 14 is the New York Jets, giving up the 11th most fantasy points to wide receivers. Week 15 is Washington, the fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. And, great, LA Rams in week 16, again, giving up the 2nd fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. I kind of wish I had traded Tyler Lockett away at this point when seeing that. Perhaps I should have looked at that a little closer when I was going through my trades. I know for my leagues on Yahoo, like the trade deadline is, it's in about an hour and a half. So, probably not going to happen for me, but perhaps for some of you, if you're on the West Coast, you might still be able to get it done before midnight. That's tough for Tyler Lockett. What are you going to do there with him? Might be too late to figure that out for a lot of you, as it is for me. Stephon Diggs, I've got on this list. Stephon Diggs has been phenomenal this year for Buffalo Bills. I will be full transparency. I'm a part of Bills Mafia. I live up here in Buffalo. Fantasy football is completely different from that, but obviously I've hoped that Diggs would play well, and he has. From a workload standpoint, his targets have been great throughout the year. I expect Buffalo to continue to lean on the pass, especially like we saw against Seattle. It's a team where, I feel like they knew that they, instead of trying to wait until they fell behind to turn to the pass, they just came right out with it. And I thought that was a great game plan. And I expect the same thing tomorrow against Arizona, another high-powered team, another potentially high-scoring game. You would expect, again, Diggs to have a nice set of opportunity there in that game. But his targets, he's been over 10, 3 of the last 5, 16, 8, 11, 9, 12 in order. Catches 10, 6, 6, 6, 9. Ooh, 3 6s in a row. I don't want to talk about that. Let's just call that one just over 5. He's been over 100 yards 4 times this year. If you look at his playoff run in week 14, it's Pittsburgh, the 9th most fantasy points to wide receivers. In week 15, it's Denver, the 8th most to wide receivers. And in week 16, it's the vaunted New England Patriots, 13th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Pretty decent run in the playoffs, pretty decent production all year. I know that in a recent live stream, I took a chat about a potential trade that was Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs for Julio Jones. And I don't remember who was asking, but the question was, should I make that trade to pick up Jones and trade away Allen and Diggs? And I know that my response to that was that if you're going to make that trade, I felt like that you could potentially be getting another player back with Julio Jones, because I think the amount of value there for Stephon Diggs' stack was pretty high. He was not in need. He had a top quarterback in addition to Allen. I don't remember who it was, but it's Jones is a big name. He's going to have production as well for Atlanta, but as well as Diggs has played this year, I mean, you're giving a lot of volume in that sort of a trade. So I hope that I can't say off the top of my head I remember who that was. I know it was one of our regulars. I'm interested to know what happened with that trade. So if you're, I would love to hear back a response on what ended up being the final result and whether that trade happened or not. But by all means, I think Diggs is somebody that you could go out there and try to get this year if you have somebody who's, potentially maybe a guy like Calvin Ridley, who's a little bit banged up, who has had a great year so far, but has played a lot of his games without Julio Jones. Potentially his value is as high now as it's going to be. And I know Ridley is a guy I have on this list. If you look at Calvin Ridley's playoff run in week 14, playing the Chargers, giving up the 9th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. In week 15, Tampa Bay, the 10th fewest to wide receivers. And in week 16, Kansas City, the 4th fewest to wide receivers. Whew, that's not good. I mean, obviously, with Julio Jones there, it's going to be tough to lock down 2 guys. But potentially, like, this is what I'm talking about, like a Calvin Ridley for Stephon Diggs. Both of them have been pretty good all year. Could you get a Diggs and end up with that much nicer playoff run as a result, and still be thinking that both sides are going to have a decent amount of volume to go? Things to think about. And let's see what else we got here. Keenan Allen, a player that I went out and was able to get a trade for today. I was very happy about. I will say that I will give you the exact details of that trade. This was a trade I was considering, and it was I gave away Cooper Kupp and Antonio Gibson for Keenan Allen. And in that league at the running back spot, I have Alvin Kamara, Josh Jacobs, James Robinson, and also Mike Davis, and also David Montgomery. It's a 10-team league. So I ended up with a good host of running backs to where Gibson was probably not going to crack my lineup, and pairing him up with Cooper Kupp, who has been decent and has a nice playoff run as well. But Keenan Allen right now has been so stellar and has seen so much volume since Justin Herbert took over. And I do happen to have Herbert as my quarterback in that league. So I liked the Allen-Herbert stack, and therefore I went out and tried to see if I could get that trade, and I was fortunate enough to get it. So Keenan Allen's a guy that I'm looking at as potential to be out there to talk about. His playoff run is in week 14, the Atlanta Falcons, high-scoring game, 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers. Week 15, Las Vegas, 17th fewest, right in the middle. And week 16 for your fantasy football championship, Denver, the 8th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. So a nice run. I'm very happy to pick up Keenan Allen. I know he had a little bit of issues with injuries this year, so I'm hoping that stays away. That was a player that I targeted as a trade potential, and perhaps you can do the same. I do see one comment here. I'm going to jump over to that, and we will get back to the rest of our input. As always, try to get chats whenever we can. It's Builder 1K or perhaps Builder 1000. It's like Powerman 4000. Remember that music group? I don't know. I might be dating myself. Builder 1K, we appreciate you being here on the stream. You look like a new viewer, so thank you for being here. We appreciate all of you that are on the stream. And your question is Mike Davis, Duke Edmonds, or Drake? Let me see here. So Chase Edmonds, Duke Johnson, Kenyon Drake, or Mike Davis. I'm going to guess, and I'll need you to follow up on this, Builder 1K. This is for one spot, or is this like a pick 2 out of 4 type situation? You might input while I wait to see if you can hit me back with a follow-up on that. Before I even look at anything, my gut here is going to say Duke Johnson, but I do want to look up these numbers first. I can tell you that Mike Davis is a player that I have on some rosters. I am playing him tomorrow in some spots, and others I am not. It's not a top-line matchup. They're playing the Bucks. Let's see here. The 12th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot for Mike Davis. I like Davis. I like how he's played this year. I see your answer here, Builder 2K or Builder 1K. I thought that might have been the case, 2 out of 4. So let's just hold on Mike Davis before I bring him as part of the answer, and let's just remember that he is Tampa Bay, the 12th fewest. We'll take a look at the other matchups. Duke Johnson, I can feel confident in. I know I have his information. Actually, I have it noted for tomorrow here for the running back spot. No, I don't actually have him noted for the running back spot, so let me look it up. Duke Johnson, come on, Yahoo, show me the information I want to see. Playing Cleveland. Well, sometimes this site wants to cooperate and sometimes it doesn't, so I'll do it this way. Let's call up Houston's team and take a look at Duke Johnson. First of all, no David Johnson on IR, so you're going to have Duke Johnson for a while. That's good news if you picked him up off the waiver wires. Let's see here. The matchup is Cleveland is allowing the 14th points to the running back spot. That's a little lower than I would have expected. However, Duke Johnson is going to get the workload in terms of pass catcher out of the backfield. I don't know if you're playing PPR. If you are, that certainly helps sway this decision. Chase Edmonds, I like, but I don't know enough. Let's put it this way. Without even going any further, I'm going to continue to look up these numbers, but I will say, if Kenyon Drake is active tomorrow, then I would pick Mike Davis and Duke Edmonds for your 2. Because with either one of those 2, you've got a running back, and you're looking at a few different things when you're talking about making these matchup decisions, these lineup decisions. You're looking at workload, you're looking at matchup, and you're looking at game script, okay? You're going to take volume over matchup. And Builder 1K, you say, yes, it's PPR. So that's even more reason that Duke Johnson is a good pick here. I'm looking at the matchup against Buffalo, against my Buffalo Bills, giving up the 17th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. So out of those guys, Edmonds and Drake with the same matchup, that is the lowest. Davis and Duke Johnson both higher, even though not, still tougher defenses. Now, this is what will change. Keep an eye on, now this is what's tough. Edmonds, he plays at the 4 o'clock game, and I'm going to take a look at the other ones. Carolina is at the 10 a.m. West Coast, so 1 o'clock on the East. They're in the first slate of games, and Duke Johnson is playing. Where are you, Houston? Why am I not seeing you? There they are, the very first game shown. They're playing in the 1 o'clock, the first window. So, yeah, this is a decision you're going to have to make before the first game start. Unfortunately, you won't know the answer to that question about whether or not Drake plays before you make this decision. So what I will do for you here is I'm going to look up the most recent report on Kenyon Drake. I know I looked at it earlier. For what it's worth, on tomorrow's show, I will have Kenyon Drake as one of my sits, my top 5 sits for tomorrow. Kenyon Drake, the note here is Adam Schefter reports has a good chance to play Week 10 against the Bills. So it's still going to be a game-time decision. That being said, to me, 2 out of those 4, it's Mike Davis and Duke Johnson. You got 2 guys who have the backfields to themselves. And even if Edmonds does have the backfield to himself, if you make that decision at clock comes along, still you're talking about the matchups. Edmonds is still the lowest. And potentially in a passing game that this could be, if the Bills play the same sort of game they played against Seattle, you're talking about probably another passing game with Arizona. Evans will see some of that pass catching out of the backfield. But at any rate, you've got those 2 guys who are all by themselves back there. They're going to get the workload. A couple of nice matchups. I think Houston's going to run the ball against Cleveland. Carolina, tough to say, but Davis has been very productive, both running and as a pass catcher. Playing again against Tampa Bay, it's a little bit of a tough matchup. But yeah, out of those four, I like Mike Davis and Duke Johnson. And by all means, Builder 1K, let us know how it works out for you. As always, I hope those guys crush it. But those are the two that I like. And I see here you say thank you. And I say no, thank you, Builder 1K. Again, as I always say, this is what we like to do. We love to chat football with you, fantasy football with you guys. If you're not in the live stream and not in the chat, and we got nothing to talk about other than our own content. So this is a lot more fun. So we love the fact that you're here. It looks like you might be a new viewer to our live stream. So by all means, if you haven't already done so, make sure and hit that subscribe. We are a brand new channel. We don't necessarily come up quite as high on searches. So to make sure that you guys always get those notifications when we have new content, make sure and subscribe to us. That'll help us out. We want to make sure that you guys are always able to get that information, just like tonight was a kind of off-the-cuff show. So thank you, Builder 1K, and hey, crush them with tomorrow. I hope so. I have done some rosters, and I wasn't able to get Duke Johnson, so wasn't as fortunate for me, unfortunately. But I do have Mike Davis in some spots, so that's good. All right, we got a chat here from. Then I'm gonna try my best with this last name. Let me just go really slow. You can tell me if I get close. Ramachandran. I hope I got that close. If I didn't, I apologize, but hopefully it's within the ballpark. Tristan, glad to have you here. Looks like you might be a new viewer, so I'm glad that you found our live stream. And you say pick 2, Gio Bernard, Duke Johnson, T. Higgins, Chase Edmonds, Patterson, McKissick, Kelly. All right, so let's go through these. I'm going to call up a couple of these just to get an eye. And I have a first thought, but I'm going to call these up first. The first guy I want to look at is Cordero Patterson, because even without David Montgomery, it sounds like, and I'm apologizing because I'm going to call up Chicago's roster. This is a player that I am not as familiar with, but the reports have been in Chicago that they don't necessarily expect Patterson to be the guy that gets the workload. Ryan Nall is the other option there in the backfield for Chicago. They expect him to get a lot of the work. I've seen good reports for him. So I don't know. I see what you're thinking with Patterson. He might see more workload because of Montgomery being out. I don't know if that's the way they're going to go. You know, he's still in there in the fold for a wide, of course. Gio Bernard's matchup tomorrow is tough. I would say I like Duke Johnson over Gio Bernard if I had to pick the two, but let me call up Gio Bernard's matchup just to take a look. And I can give you better information that way. And Giovanni Bernard playing the Pittsburgh Steelers. They are well in the red. The third fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. Now, clearly, he's going to catch passes out of the backfield tomorrow. And clearly, Cincinnati's going to throw the ball, and they're probably going to be trailing a lot of that game. So that makes them still a decent option, even though they're tough. T. Higgins is a player that I like a lot, and I liked him all year. Let me call up his matchup against Pittsburgh. It's actually much better. I don't have it right here in front of me, I don't think, but let me call it up for Cincinnati. Pittsburgh, I believe they're in the top 10 in terms of what they're allowing to wide receivers right now. They are allowing the 9th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. So I'm going to right away, I did not ask you if it's PPR or not, but I feel that that's going to be one of my two choices either way, but especially if it is, even more so. T. Higgins would be one of my two choices there. I'm going to go through the rest. Chase Edmonds, I will say Chase Edmonds, if keep an eye on your notifications tomorrow and your reports. If Kenyon Drake doesn't play, then I feel Chase Edmonds is a good pick. If Kenyon Drake does play, then I don't love it as much. I think they're going to end up splitting. If you're going to end up with a situation of two players that are splitting, then to me, it's J.D. McKissick, even if he's splitting with Antonio Gibson. I think that, let me take a look at Antonio Gibson. So, and McKissick both. The Lions are giving up the most fantasy points in the league to the running back spot. They're giving up the 3rd most rushing yards allowed. They've allowed 7 players to go over 20 or more fantasy points this year at the running back spot. McKissick has shown a lot of volume of targets since Alex Smith has been playing there. So I definitely like him. When you say Kelly, I'm assuming you're saying Joshua Kelly. I don't know that I necessarily like him as much as I would like a McKissick, although I will take a look at that matchup because I don't know. They do have Justin Jackson out now to injury. And they have I'm not sure what else they have going on in that backfield. So let me take a look and see what they're expected to do tomorrow. Here is what I'm calling up. Kalen Ballage obviously is back there now too. I'm going to look at Joshua Kelly's notes to see if there are any reports there. His volume has been down a little bit. 9 rushes last week. I would say I don't think that I like him over McKissick or Bernard. So essentially, this is coming down to a choice of 2 out of 3 for me. It's Duke Johnson. I guess it's 2 out of 4. I've eliminated some. I've got it down to Gio, Duke Johnson, T. Higgins, and J.D. McKissick. Out of those 4, I like T. Higgins, and I don't see how you don't go with. This is tough. They're close. These are close. Duke Johnson's going to have the entire backfield back there to himself. He's going to catch passes. It's a little bit tougher of a matchup. They are playing Cleveland, but again, Cleveland is not like it's not a team that's away necessarily on defense, even though they haven't necessarily given up as many points. I like Duke Johnson there. I like T. Higgins there. Out of those, again, with any of these, you guys always know your rosters better than anybody. So I'm glad to give you the input. And I see a follow up here. I'm gonna jump back with this follow up. I wanted to start Duke because of Johnson being out. I want to start Edmonds only if Drake isn't back. I agree with that. And I would want to start Higgins. Would you agree? Yes. Those are my 2 of the 4. I would definitely, and I agree with you. The only way that changes is if Edmonds is out. The issue that you've got there is I don't know that those games are going to line up to give you that choice. Duke Johnson plays at the 1 p.m. spot. Let's see. Higgins is playing. He's at the 4 o'clock. So, yeah, you do have the option where you can start Duke Johnson in that first game and then choose for your second game between Edmonds and T. Higgins. I think that's a very reasonable choice. T. Higgins has seen great volume. I think Cincinnati is going to be throwing the ball just like they have all year tomorrow. So I think you're going to see the same thing there. And Pittsburgh, even though, Pittsburgh you think of as a tough defense, they are more vulnerable to the wide receivers than you would think. So, yes, I would agree with all of your thoughts there that it is Duke Johnson and T. Higgins. And if Drake doesn't play, you can always make that swap last minute. You'll, of course, know where you're at in your matchup by that point. So you can, make that choice when you get there. And absolutely good luck, and I hope it works out for you. I hope no matter what guys you pick, I hope they crush it. And Tristan, if you're new to the screen, to the stream, glad to have you here. If you haven't yet, click that subscribe button. Make sure that you're able to get those notifications when we have new content. And by all means, join us back on another show, and I'll be watching. So if I see a follow-up here, I'll jump back in. If Drake isn't back, would you recommend starting Edmonds over Higgins? I think there is an argument to be made for that. Did you tell me if you are PPR? You did not. I think if you're PPR, then I think Higgins is probably the choice anyway at that point. But let's look up. Let me give you the matchups between the 2. So T. Higgins, the actual matchup, Pittsburgh is allowing the 9th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Edmonds, they are allowing the 17th most fantasy points to the running back spot. Buffalo, their opponents. I've already looked that one up earlier, so I do remember that one from before, but I'm just going to double check it to make sure I'm telling you the right thing. Yes, Buffalo is allowing the 17th fewest fantasy points. So the better of those 2 matchups is T. Higgins. It's probably close if Drake doesn't play. If your gut says that you feel like that's the better play, you can always go that way. But Higgins has been very good, and he's seen consistent volume. I do feel like Cincinnati is going to continue to throw the ball tomorrow. So I don't think you can go wrong with that choice. I don't think you're necessarily making a bad choice if you decide to go the other way on that one. So yeah, I think, and you do say PPR. Yeah, to me, I feel like it's Higgins. I've liked Higgins all year. It's a player I've considered trying to go out there and trade for myself. So yeah, I like those 2. But again, you have that option where if you go with your gut, or perhaps the person that you're playing is either starting Joe Burrow or starting Kyler Murray. And by that time, if you've for instance, if your opponent is starting Kyler Murray and you beat in that game, then there's an argument to be made there to starting Edmonds if he's the only guy, because if Murray does have any touchdowns to Edmonds, it negates your opponent. So there's things to think about, but I don't think you're going wrong with Duke Johnson and T. Higgins there by any means. So yeah, absolutely. Hope it works out for you. And thank you, Tristan, for being with us, and thank you for the question. All right, let me see. Next here I've got from. I'm going to go real quick. Jack Anderson, you're next. But I'm going to go real quick to this follow-up from Builder 1K. I don't think that I got to this. You're saying your wide receivers and my flex is Tyler Lockett, Devontae Adams, and Terry McLaurin. Jared Goff should be a good week. Yeah, it should be a great week. Tyler Lockett is a little bit of a question mark for me this week. I've thought about taking him out in some spots where I have him, but I like Adams. I like McLaurin. Jared Goff do I have him? I definitely have him among my top starts. I'm going to look at my list. He may actually be my number 1 start tomorrow. No, I have him as my number 3 start tomorrow. But yeah, I think Jared Goff against the Seahawks play. Yeah, in very good shape. So yeah, crush him, Builder 1K. Go out and get him. All right, Jack Anderson. I see your question here. Duke Johnson or Chase Edmonds? This is, again, a case of what will we know by the time game time comes around if Kenyon Drake is planning on playing or not. For Houston, it's the 1 p.m. game. For Arizona, it's the 4 p.m. game. So if we don't know anything more than we know right now, it appears, based on reports, that Kenyon Drake will play. If that's the case, Duke Johnson has the backfield all to himself in Houston. Cleveland, while they're not allowing really the utmost, to the running back spot, I'm going to look up the exact number for you for what the matchup is there. I can tell you that the matchup is 17th fewest is what Buffalo running back spot. And in terms of running backs, Cleveland is allowing, come on, Yahoo, the 14th fewest. So they are close. However, the clear difference here is volume. And if what we think is going to happen and Kenyon Drake does play, makes Duke Johnson the choice here. He's going to have the backfield entirely to himself. If it's a PPR league as well, he's a pass catcher, so he's going to add that and make that a little bit safer floor for you. Again, fantasy football, you never know. Sometimes it's like poker. You just hope to make the right decision and the cards fall into place. Cards, so to speak, with the Arizona Cardinals. That wasn't planned. It probably wasn't very good either, but at any rate, I like Duke Johnson out of those two. And if for some reason, the information comes out that Drake is not playing, then your decision is a little closer. Then it's kind of a toss-up because I do like Chase Edmonds, as a standalone back in games that Drake doesn't play. I don't think Kenyon Drake has been all that great this year at all. I've thought for a while that because of his injury that Edmonds could actually end up getting more volume even when he did come back. But for now, I think you're going to be much more certain that Duke Johnson, we know he's the guy in Houston tomorrow. And we know that if the Buffalo-Arizona game plays out like the Buffalo-Seattle game did last week, you're going to see a lot of passing and possibly not as much from the run game, whereas you'll probably see more of that in the Houston-Cleveland game. I'm going to even check the weather. It's a deep dive, checking the weather for tomorrow. That game forecast is for showers in Cleveland. So, again, if the weather's awful, more rushes. Duke Johnson, he's the guy. I like him. I would pick him over Chase Edmonds. If we knew beforehand, it might be different, but I would think of those two. That would be the guy I would go with there. Jack Anderson, thank you for being on the stream. We appreciate you being here. It looks like you're a new viewer to our live streams. So again, go ahead and make sure and hit that subscribe button. And I want to make sure that you guys all get those notifications when we have new content. We are a brand new channel, so sometimes it's a little bit harder to find us. But we do like talking fantasy football with you guys, and we want to make sure you guys can be back with our future live streams. All right, let's see here. Did I miss anybody else? I see another follow-up from Builder1K. I'm going to continue to call you Builder1000 along the lines of Powerman 5K, like Powerman. Was it 5K or 4K? 4,000, whatever. You get the point. Let me pop it up here. Builder1K. I'm a Seahawks fan, and our 2 starting corners are out, and Jamal isn't doing any pass coverage, so I'm excited, but I don't want us to lose like we did to the Bills. Well, again, full transparency, I am Bills Mafia because I am up here in Buffalo. So I will say that I have I definitely separate my fantasy football from my actual rooting. And with as far as Seattle goes, I have them in a lot of spots this year between DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. I didn't end up with any Russell Wilson, although I did try in some of my drafts. I did think he was going to have a great year, and obviously he's been great. For sure, I don't know that so the deal with like the Rams tomorrow, it's like they're a team that wants to run the ball. I think you're going to see a great game from Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp both tomorrow. I don't know how you don't. I think it's going to turn into one of those high-scoring games. My fear is that I don't know. I'm having a difficult time trying to put my finger on what's going to happen in terms of who's going to find that coverage from the Rams. Is Jalen Ramsey going to blanket DK Metcalf for the entire game? Even if he does, when you look at the Rams' production this year, they've been tough against everybody, regardless of of who. Like it happens to be on who. So I'm concerned with Lockett because his production it's been fluctuating so much. My fear is that I take Lockett out of one of my lineups, and then all of a sudden he has a huge game because, like we saw, I think was it the Arizona game where they threw it away from Patrick Peterson the entire game and went to Lockett. Like, I don't know. It's hard to say. Like, it's a complete toss-up for me. So I don't know what I'm going to do. It's possible because we're on live at noon tomorrow. Right now I have Tyler Lockett in my lineup. I may not even get a chance to look again. So he may just end up staying there. We'll see what happens. So let me pop up this next one. Thank you, Builder 1K. I'm sorry about the loss last week, but it was nice for us Bills fans. We haven't had as much success recently as you guys might have had up there. So hopefully you'll be all right with us getting that one. So Vicious Killer Gaming thinks this is a dope ass stream. I appreciate that. And hey, if you're new and you reaffirm with dope stream, thank you for that. Hey, glad to have you here. Like I said, we're brand new. We're a brand new channel this year, and we're just growing. So please, if you haven't done so, if you like what we're doing, go ahead and drop a thumbs up for us. Any of you guys, feel free to do that. But most importantly, hit that subscribe button so that you get notifications when we have new content. We need to do that in order to grow because, as a new channel, we are not as easy to find in the searches. We're not coming up as high, and we want to talk fantasy football with you guys. So, yeah, by all means, hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you on future live streams. And I will say, talking about future live streams, before we hit up any more chats, let's talk about our main show, the TFF Live Sunday pregame show. And that is live tomorrow, which is actually in a few hours today at 12 noon. And we do this show. This is our main show. Tonight was kind of an impromptu show. But our main show is every Sunday at 12 noon Eastern time. We are live streaming right here on our YouTube channel to get you ready for fantasy football matchups. We answer all of your fantasy football questions, especially getting your lineups ready. And also we make sure to bring you all the other important information like actives and actives, and also our top 5 starts and sits at each of the positions. So we do that every Sunday. So if you like what we're doing and you're an early riser, even though it's a late night tonight, then we'd love to have you on our live stream tomorrow. Come back and join us. And then I'll get up our other information for you. If any of you are new, we are the Fantasy Follow. Like I said, we're brand new. So we thank you for being here. If you're watching on the replay, thank you just the same. And feel free to leave your comments below. You can also reach us on Twitter, and that is at the Fantasy Follow, and that's fantasy spelled FNTSY. And if you want to leave us a question on our Twitter during the week, you can do that using the hashtag AskTFFLive. We will take those questions and we will use them live right along with your tweet on our Sunday pregame show. So we'll have all of you out there for the entire world to see. Facebook / the Fantasy Follow, and our website, fantasyfollow.com. All right, we'll go back and get these comments back up here. And I see a follow-up from Builder 1K, bench Lockett his 200-yard game. I will say, fortunately, I had him in for both of his big games this year, and that's what worries me the most, is taking him out tomorrow. The person that I'm considering playing over him is Brandon Cooks in a great matchup against Cleveland. It's kind of a must-win spot for me in that particular league, so I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do, but in the next 10 hours or so, 11 hours, I'll have to make that decision. So we'll see what happens. Not sure what I'm going to do yet. But thank you, Builder 1K. From Vicious, here's the trade that you're talking about. I traded Davante Adams and Aaron Jones for Tom Brady. Was that good? He says in a follow-up. I, unfortunately, Vicious, will have to tell you that I don't know if I would be a big fan of that sort of a trade. Unless you're saying that you picked up Davante Adams and Aaron Jones and gave away Tom Brady. If that's the case, then yes, then you did great. And your next response is that some idiot gave you Waller for Kelsey. I don't know why they scammed themselves. So Waller and Kelsey, I mean, I like them both. Kelsey is obviously really tough. Waller's been really tough too. But back to your original. Yeah, if what you're saying is that you traded away Tom Brady and were able to get Davante Adams, then and Aaron Jones, then I would say you crushed it. Unfortunately, I don't know that I would say the same for either if it was you or your opponent in the Tom Brady side of that, since Davante Adams and Aaron Jones have been pretty good. But hopefully what you mean is that you got those two back, in which case you did awesome. All right, Builder 1K follows up and says Brandon is really consistent. I agree. Brandon Cooks has brought it on the past few weeks. The scary part is that the first part of his year was not that great. So that's part of why I'm wondering what I do there. But I don't know. You're also helping me lean towards Cooks. I could see where I could see the thought going both ways. And then you say, is that good? I'm not sure what you're asking me. Is that good? So feel free to follow up. And Vicious says you received Tom Brady. Well, I mean, if Tom Brady is able to continue to play and you have need at quarterback, then you have a possibility. It's a lot of value been given away. Here's the follow up. You say someone with me Gurley for and Mixon. Should I do it? That trade I like much more. I think Adam Thielen is a tough one this year. His volume has been down. They've certainly wanted to run the ball since Dalvin Cook has been there. And that means his targets have been kind of hurting. Mixon's been banged up. Gurley's been seeing all the workload there. I like Gurley going forward. I don't think this is a bad offer. If you're at all concerned, if you're getting back enough value, you can always counter offer and see if there's perhaps a lesser wide receiver that you can pair up on this person's roster along with Gurley to where you're making it like a 2-for-2 instead of a 2-for-1 type trade. Perhaps they've got a player of lesser name value that's still worthwhile, like a T. Higgins type player, someone along those lines, or even like a Travis Fulgham or a Jalen Reagor, somebody that's a lesser, that they would clearly see as a lesser player to Adam Thielen. Where you're getting an upgrade at Gurley and a downgrade, but you still have a player that's playable. So, yeah, I do think Gurley has good potential for the rest of this year. And let me see here. Builder 1K says, I traded Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown for Devontae Adams and Kenyon Drake. Are you saying, I'm assuming you're saying you traded away Henry and Brown for Adams and Drake. So that's a very fair trade. You're getting an upgrade with Adams. You're taking a little bit of a chance on Drake. I'm trying to see. This is where I'm going through as many chats as I can, trying to remember back if you had asked about the lineup question pertaining to Drake. I don't remember and I don't see it. But either way, I think both sides of this trade did fine. I think this is a very fair trade on both sides. Devontae Adams has been crushing it, so he's a definite upgrade for A.J. Brown. Derrick Henry is an upgrade for Kenyon Drake. So, if you needed to bolster your wide receivers, you did so with Adams. If you had enough running backs that you were, had a surplus at that spot and you were trading away Derrick Henry, you've got back a player in Kenyon Drake that is potentially to have some good games, although he hasn't really shown it so much this year. It's been very hard to predict. But at the same time, you picked up a great receiver. So, yeah, I mean, obviously every trade is different. Every roster is different. But if that is your situation, then you did well to get Adams on that roster. All right. Thank you, Fishes. Thank you, Builder. I'm going to put up our notification here about the chat is open. Our chat remains open for a little bit while more. I do have a couple more players that I have yet to talk about in terms of potential trades. Have them up on the other screen here. So I'm going to go through these last couple of guys while we're still on the air. We won't probably be with you for too much longer. So if you got any last-minute chat questions, feel free to hit those up. We have a couple of more wide receivers that I wanted to talk about that I haven't gotten to yet. I'm not sure who I talked about last, but I know I'm down towards the bottom of the list. And actually, no, it looks like I did. The only person I talked about, really, I talked about Boyd, Allen, talked a little about Julio Jones. I actually looks like I got through everybody. So awesome. So then let's do this. The last part of what we'll do here is I will continue to take your chats for the rest of the show, but I'm going to go through and let me just get up. Let me see. Okay, I see one from awesome. I almost missed these. K. Ellis Talks. 4 point per round, I believe that is, or 4 point per touchdown. Trade Watson for Lamar. Lamar has a much better playoff schedule. I will say that I mulled around a possible trade to try to pick up Lamar Jackson myself. I don't disagree with you at all that I think he's going to pick it up from what he's done so far this year. I'm going to look these two up really quick just so I can familiarize myself with the matchups coming up. I don't think that you're in bad shape by still having Deshaun Watson. Playoff run for Jackson, Week 14, Cleveland, 10th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Week 15, Jacksonville, 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks. And Week 16 for your fantasy football championship, New York Giants, 11th fewest, but still you would think Baltimore is beating the Giants, and game script saves you with Jackson's running ability there. Yeah, I like Jackson. I will look at Watson because I'm curious as to what his run looks like, especially since I definitely picked him up by a trade in one of my leagues this year. And let's see what we got here. Oof. Week 14. Even the week before that is Indy. Week 14, Chicago. That's 2nd fewest to quarterbacks. Indianapolis Colts, Week 15, fewest. Oh, my goodness. 16, Cincinnati is the 7th fewest, so they're in the middle. Wow. If you're in that situation right now where you're gunning towards the playoffs at this point and you're looking real good and you want to bolster that lineup, yeah, I don't think this is bad at all. I mean, you could certainly – I'm sure that somebody that has Lamar Jackson is ready to get rid of him at this point for someone like Deshaun Watson who's played that well. I don't dislike this trade at all. I mean, yeah, if you're getting ready for those playoffs and you're in good shape to where these next few weeks, even Watson's next few matchups aren't that great. New England, Detroit, Indy. I like this. I like this a lot. Yeah, I think you're in good shape with that. I don't see, that this is a bad move for you. And, if it doesn't work out, if the guy you're trying to trade with doesn't want to give up Lamar, it's not like you're in awful shape with Deshaun Watson because he's clearly a great quarterback. But yeah, you're right. Lamar has a great run towards the playoffs. And yeah, I think if this is a deal you can get, you want to take that shot, you're taking that shot, you're playing to win. I like it. So yes, thanks KLS Talks again for the question. Let me see one more from Builder 1K. I hope Devontae Adams drops 30 to 40 points just to add up to more than Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown to rub it in. I hope I don't have to play Devontae Adams in too many more matchups because he's been phenomenal this year. I've got Aaron Rodgers tomorrow as the number 2 quarterback on my start sits, so I think he's going to be really awesome. So I'm worried to have to play these guys. I agree. He's probably going to, Devontae Adams, have a lot more big games in store, and to me, he has been I'm gonna look this up before I come right out and say this because what I was about to say is Devontae Adams has been the best wide receiver in fantasy football this year. He is the WR3 right now overall. I'm looking at half-point PPR. He's just over 10 points from the top. Tyreek Hill is at the top. He's got a bye. Devontae, they've already had their bye, I think, right? Yeah, they already had their bye, so he's got 1 week less, and he's missed weeks to injury. DK Metcalf is at number 2. Diggs is at number 4. Lockett 5. To me, like you're looking at the top of drafts when you think back to draft season, and the top 2 guys you would have thought were Michael Thomas, Devontae Adams. Obviously, Thomas being injured all year. Devontae Adams returned you great value if you went out and picked him. I think it's a hard argument to make that he's not the best wide receiver in fantasy football this year right now. I mean, you can say Metcalf. You can probably argue Diggs. But to me, I like Devontae Adams. I like that situation. Obviously, those other guys are great too. But yeah, I definitely like Devontae. All right, we got a quick jumping in the chat from Fabian Vasquez. Says, yo, Fabian, glad to have you back. I believe I recognize your name from before. If not, then glad to have you as a new viewer. But yeah, glad to have you here. We got a little bit of time left on our stream, so if you got any questions, feel free to jump in. Before you do that, I'm going to real quick go through our content that we had planned for you again tonight because that's what I wanted to get in. And so this is some information. It's called Saturday Stars. I see. Okay, we'll get Fabian. We'll get you first. You say, what should I do with Ronald Jones? That's a good question. Ronald Jones, if you're asking, follow up and tell me while I'm answering this question if you mean should you trade him or if you mean should you sit him tomorrow. If you're asking me if you should trade him, Ronald Jones probably has his highest value to me. And there's arguments to be made on both sides with this. But Ronald Jones, I think he has his highest value that he's going to have for the rest of this year right now. I personally see Leonard Fournette continuing to take over that backfield. I don't think you're going to see a situation where it's going to be all Fournette and not Jones at all. But to me, clearly, they trust Fournette more as a pass catcher. That bolsters his floor in any given week. If he gets some of the volume as a rusher and all of the volume as a pass catcher, that moves him ahead. I don't think you're going to see Ronald Jones as a pass catcher. I think if you look at the look on Brady's face, some of those passes he's thrown him that he hasn't caught, that just tells the story to me. Like, to me, this is Tom Brady's team. What he wants is what he gets there, for better or for worse. Obviously, I'm a Bills fan, and to have him in New England for so long, like, it is what it is. But this is his team. I wouldn't be surprised. It's been clear that he had a hand in Gronkowski, Antonio Brown, as far as bringing them into the team. I would not be surprised when they went out and got Fournette at the beginning of the season if he was somehow involved in that decision. That's obviously, considering a lot of power to him. I think he has that power. When you bring in a guy of that name, you're essentially turning that team over to him. What do you do with Ronald Jones? Is that a guy you can think about trading right now, if that's what you're asking, and get back somebody to bolster possibly a wide receiver side? Can you flip that? He has had a very good year so far. There are probably wide receivers that would fit in that realm. That would be, I'm going to call up my list of players that I put down here. There are probably players that would fit in terms of a level playing field where someone else in your league might consider making that trade. Ronald Jones for Terry McLaurin, Ronald Jones for Tyler Boyd, somewhere along those lines. Not necessarily the biggest names in fantasy football, but players that are very good, have been very good, and have great fantasy fantasy playoff matchups. Those are guys that you'll want to think about if you're thinking about making a trade for Jones. Again, Fabian, thank you for being here. Appreciate all you guys being on the stream. Again, we're brand new, so for those of you that had more of a difficult time finding us, make sure and hit that subscribe button. That way you get those notifications on whenever we do have new content. All right, I'm going to run through the rest of our stuff real quick from tonight's show, Saturday Stars, and this is giving you the top matchups of the week. Tomorrow's Week 10 games, and so this is not necessarily a start-sit list. It's not ranked in order of top 5. These are just players that I feel are top matchups and players that are going to excel in Week 10, starting with Robert Woods versus the Seahawks. Seahawks giving up the most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. They've 12 players, 20 or more fantasy points this year. 100 or more yards to 9 of them, to 9 players. Like Robert Woods a lot. Last week before the bye, 28.4 points for Woods. I think he has another great game tomorrow. And next in that same realm is Cooper Kupp, wide receiver for the Rams against the Seahawks. Same stats. Kupp last year versus the Seahawks in 2 games averaged 20.6 fantasy points. I think there's going to be plenty to go around in this game. 20 targets he saw in their last game against Miami, so I like Cooper Kupp as a Saturday star, which is now, of course, a Sunday star in that matchup tomorrow. Another wide receiver, Allen Robinson. Minnesota Vikings giving up the second most fantasy to the wide receivers. I like Robinson a lot tomorrow. 22 or more fantasy points to 5 different receivers by the Vikings, allowing the 3rd most passing yards in the league. Robinson, in the last 2 games, has averaged 17.9 fantasy points. He's had 80 or more yards in both. I like Robinson tomorrow. And one more wide receiver before I get to that next chat that I see there, and that is Will Fuller from the Houston Texans. I think Fuller has a big game against the Cleveland Browns. That game is at Cleveland. Browns allowing the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers. They give up 11 catches to Tyler Boyd in Week 7. They've given up 12 or more fantasy points to 6 different receivers this year, and Fuller has had a touchdown now in 6 straight games, 100 or more yards in 3 of those. I like Will Fuller to have a big day in Week 10. Let me jump over and get this chat here and follow up with Fabian. You said I have to start him because all of my other running backs are injured. Yeah, if that's the situation that you're in, then yeah, I think you do that. Obviously, I should probably say there were some probably running backs on the waiver wire that may have been, potentials for you this week, like a Duke Johnson or a J.D. McKissick. Chances are they're gone by now. You wouldn't expect. But yeah, if you're in a situation where you got like a Raheem Mostert or an Austin Eckler, guys that are just waiting to get healthy, then yeah, you're stuck with Ronald Jones. I don't necessarily think that it's not like he's going to get shut out tomorrow. I can't imagine that. I just like Fournette to continue to progress. And, you still have a good chance to have those big Ronald Jones games. I just think Fournette has the safer floor going forward. But again, you never know in this game, like injuries happen. Ronald Jones could end up being the only guy there again. It's hard to say, but yeah, I like I said, I think it's a guy where it's not the right side of the committee that's going on there in Tampa Bay. But hey, I've been wrong lots of times. I'll admit it, I'm wrong just as much as anybody else. So hopefully try to get some of them right too. But yeah, I think that Fournette is the guy continuing moving forward there. All right, let me jump back to these and we'll go through our next set of Saturday stars. Here is the running back, position for tomorrow / later today's week 10 games. We're looking at, where is he? Antonio Gibson. There he is, the running back for the Washington football team, playing the Detroit Lions. Detroit allowing the most fantasy points to the running back spot. He's the first of two guys that we'll talk about here. In terms of what Detroit allows, they've given up 20 more fantasy points to 7 running backs this year. They have given 20 or more fantasy points to 4 running backs in the last 3 weeks alone, and they've allowed the 3rd most rushing yards in the league. Gibson has had a touchdown each of the last 2 weeks. 108 rushing yards in Week 7 versus Dallas. I like this matchup for Antonio Gibson quite a bit. I think he's going to have a good chance, but I do think in this game there's going to be plenty to go around, and that's why I think that J.D. McKissic also is a Saturday star. I think he has a good chance to have a very nice game tomorrow. Same stats. We've seen McKissic be that safety valve for Alex Smith. 22 targets in the 2 games Alex Smith has played. I think you're going to continue to see him get a lot of work. Perhaps cut into Gibson's workload a little bit, but you would still think Gibson's going to get the goal line work, and playing against the Lions, they should have opportunities there as well. So I like both of these players for Week 10. All right, Saturday star Kareem Hunt in tomorrow's matchup versus Houston. That game is in Cleveland. The Texans allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to the running back spot. 19 or more fantasy points 5 times this year. They've given up 100 or more rushing yards 4 times. And James Robinson almost got there with 99 last week, or it would have been 5. Hunt, in his last 3 games, has been a little bit off from what he had done earlier in the year. In the last 3, he's averaged 12.1, but he has scored at least that much or more in all of his other games, including the games where Nick Chubb played. And I do think with Chubb coming back, I don't think that's enough cause to be concerned with Hunt's workload. I think he's going to be just fine. I think there's plenty to go around. They'll use them both. And I think that Hunt was producing plenty of value even before Chubb got injured. So I like Kareem Hunt as a Saturday star, one of the top matchups tomorrow. Also at the running back spot, I like Leonard Fournette, one of the top matchups. Playing Carolina, the Panthers allowing the 5th most fantasy points to the running back spot. 25 or more fantasy points 4 times this year they've given up. They've allowed 9 rushing touchdowns, an additional 2 passing touchdowns to running backs. They're giving up the 13th fewest rushing yards. This is interesting. They've given up the 13th fewest rushing yards, but they're the 5th most fantasy points. What does that mean? That means they're all being carried by touchdowns, all these points. They're letting these guys into the end zone. So you expect more of that to happen. I think Fournette's the guy they're going to trust in those situations. It could be Jones, but I think Fournette's going to get the work as a pass catcher as well. He did lead the Bucs in receiving, 6 catches last game, that awful game against the Saints. I think if you throw that game out and you look at his 2 previous games, he averaged 12.9 fantasy points in those 2. I think he'll be back to that level. I think he can throw out that terrible game against the Saints. And I do see one more chat. I will get to that after this next Saturday star, and that is James Conner. Conner's an interesting case for me because last week his snap count went down. He was averaging 63% of all offensive snaps. Last week it was down to 46%. Not sure what happened there or why, if they're trying to protect him. We know Conner's had trouble with injuries in the past. This week playing the Bengals, they're allowing the 9th most fantasy points to running backs. They've given up 17 or more 4 times, and they're allowing the 4th most rushing yards in the league. Conner last year played them once and scored 26.5 fantasy points. That was early in the year before he got injured. I think this is a very good spot for James Conner. Not sure what happens after that going forward, but I think for the very least at this week, you're looking at a nice game out of James Conner. All right, let me jump back over to see what we got here. And this is follow-up from Fabian. I'll get that up on the screen. Is my running back core good or no for my second league? Josh Jacobs, Nyheim Hines, Devontae Freeman, and Mark Ingram. I think it's whenever. Well, I'll say this. Devontae Freeman has gone on IR for the Giants. So he is out for a while. I'm going to double-check that to make sure I'm not giving you bad information. As soon as my computer cooperates with me, let's pull up the Giants. But I am nearly 100% sure that I'm not misspeaking in saying that. Devontae Freeman, yes, is on IR, and that's a minimum of 3 weeks. So they have him out, and the next week he would possibly play would be week 13. I think Wayne Gallman has taken over that backfield for the Giants. It's not like it's the most stellar anywhere in the league, but still potential to produce some value. But I think it's Wayne Gallman that's going to get the bulk of that work there. So I would expect that moving forward. Josh Jacobs is, of course, a winner. Nyheim Hines is very interesting. Now, here's the deal. Is like a little bit earlier in the season, if you looked at these four players, Ingram, it's been a real guessing game with Baltimore. I think that's a mess in that backfield with J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. I don't know how, I drafted Ingram in a league. I no longer have him. I'm pretty sure I cut him. I don't think I traded him. Just a complete coin flip. You never know who they're going to play. I would have never expected that at all for Baltimore this year. I thought they would have leaned towards Ingram and he would have been fine. Unfortunately, that's a guy that you drafted probably mid-round and just a draft pick that just went nowhere. I feel for you there because I went through the same thing. However, the Nyheim Hines thing is he has come on, and it seems for whatever reason that Indy does not really trust Jonathan Taylor at this point. And they need to have that pass catcher out of the backfield, and he seems to be the only one out of their guys between Taylor and Jordan Wilkins that they really trust. I think Nyheim Hines is going to be a fine player in your flex going forward. If he's your RB2 instead of your flex and you're super stacked at wide receiver, then so be it. I know a lot of times in leagues, you have a spot in your lineup that's labeled flex, but if you've leaned heavy wide receiver and you've got 2 or 3 top wide receivers, essentially your flex guy is that third receiver or whatnot, and he might be a guy that's only worthy of a WR2 or better. So, essentially you've just kind of moved your flex to that running back guy. So, yeah, I think Nyheim Hines is a flex level and could potentially return more for you. Obviously, he's had some big games. So, I think that you're trending upward in terms of where you're at this point. Hines' value might not have been that great a couple of weeks ago, but I think it's going up. I don't know that Mark Ingram's going to return to that value, and I don't know about Freeman, but for sure, you got 2 players there that are very playable at this point. So I don't think you're in bad shape. And hopefully, you're in that sort of spot where you're making that run towards the playoffs at this point anyways. So, hopefully those guys continue to crush it and you can get in there and make some waves and win that league for yourself. So thank you again, Fabian, for the question and the comment. Thank you again, all you guys, for being here. Appreciate you being on the stream. I will continue to go through the rest of our Saturday stars. We will wrap this up shortly after that. So we're almost 2:30 on the East Coast. If you got any last-minute chat questions, feel free to hit me up, and we'll go through them. But we got a few more of these Saturday stars to go through. I see one more popped up. I'll get that real quick. And it's Fabian with a follow-up. My wide receivers are DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Corey Davis at flex. Yeah, I mean, obviously, these Metcalf and Lockett they're both in the top 6 or so, I think, WRs for the year. So they've been very productive. Metcalf has been steady, and Lockett's that guy that has had big games and a couple not as great. Hopefully he has a big game tomorrow. So I have a lineup choice to make for myself in at least one of my leagues with Tyler Lockett. I have him in a couple of spots. And Corey Davis has been productive. He had that rough game against Chicago, but a lot of wide receivers have rough games against Chicago. So, yeah, I mean, you're in okay shape. You need to avoid injuries. You want to make sure your guys stay healthy. You've probably made it through most of your buys at this point, so that's good. But hopefully, like I said, you're in that spot where you're making that run for the playoffs now, because this is that time of year. So, we want to see everybody get in there and get in and win those leagues. That's what we're all hoping for, and getting those matchups knocked away every week. So obviously that's what we want to see. But again, thank you, Fabian. Appreciate the chat. I'll jump back over, and we are at the quarterback spot for Saturday Stars. And these are the top matchups. Now, these are not necessarily ranked in terms of a sit list for tomorrow, but these are just the top matchups to take a look at. We'll have the starts and sits on our Sunday pregame show tomorrow, or later on today, for that matter, at 12 noon Eastern time. But these are the best matchups at these different positions. Jared Goff playing the Seattle Seahawks. This is the top matchup to me. Seahawks allowing the most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. And Goff, even though he's been up and down, if you look at the matchup, the Seahawks have given up 23 or more fantasy points to 6 different quarterbacks this year. They've actually given up 29 or more to 4 quarterbacks. They've allowed the most passing yards in the league. Goff, now he's only had 1 game over 19 fantasy points this year. I'm sorry, in the last 5 games. But last year, when he played the Seahawks, in those 2 games, he averaged 344 passing yards. And the Seahawks have probably been giving up more passing yards this year than they were last year. So you would expect this to be an even better game for Jason Saturday Star. Aaron Rodgers, the next guy I have on the list. I think Aaron Rodgers is going to crush it tomorrow against Jacksonville. Jaguars allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. They've given up 24 or more 5 times this year. They've given up 300 or more passing yards 4 times. Third most passing yards allowed in the league. Rodgers, in his last 3 games, 11 touchdowns, and he has had 22 or more fantasy points in 6 out of 8. Been very consistent. Game script-wise, possibility Green Bay gets up and runs it a little more, but it's a good chance a lot of those touchdowns earlier, passes Devontae Adams, you would expect him to get a lot of these. So I like Aaron Rodgers as a top matchup tomorrow. We've got Derek Carr as a top matchup playing against the Broncos. Denver allowing the 8th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. Do see a couple of chats here. I will get to those. I'm going to rip through the rest of these real quick before we close this up. Carr playing the Broncos. Broncos have given up 19 or more fantasy points all but 1 game this year. 3 touchdowns to the quarterback each of those 2 games. And Derek Carr, he's only had 1 game over 22 fantasy points this year, even though I felt like he's had some good matchups. I feel like this is another good one, but he has had 2 or more touchdowns all but 2 games. So I like Derek Carr. I like that matchup for tomorrow. And Deshaun Watson, I like this matchup as well. I'm going to have him as my top sit actually tomorrow on Starts and Sits on our Sunday pregame show. And when we're done with all this, I'll get you the times for that. So check us out if you want. Watson playing the Browns. Cleveland allowing the 10th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. That game is at Cleveland. The weather doesn't look like a great forecast, so that could impact this. However, Cleveland has given up 24 or more fantasy points 4 times this year. 400 or more passing yards twice this year. 9th most passing yards overall allowed in the league. Watson, 4 straight games with 24 or more fantasy points at the quarterback spot, and he's had 2 or more touchdowns now in 5 straight games. So I really like Deshaun Watson as a top matchup tomorrow. All right, rip through a couple of tight ends here, and then I'll get to those chats. Eric Ebron at the tight end spot is a Saturday star. It's been one of these guys I've been talking about for a few weeks now on the waiver wire list as a possible tight end stream that you can fill a spot with. He set a great run of games. Playing the Eagles, who are allowing the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends. They've given up 10 or more fantasy points to tight ends 6 times this year. They've actually given up 28 or more twice. I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong. That's Evan Ingram, who's also on the list. Check that. Eric Ebron playing Cincinnati. Bengals allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to the tight end spot. They've given up 10 or more 6 times this year. And Ebron has had a touchdown each of his last 2 games. The next guy who I almost started talking about was Evan Ingram, who is one of those guys that I just feel is really hit or miss and really difficult to figure out when you're supposed to start him or not. However, this is a good matchup. The Eagles, the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends. 10 or more fantasy points 6 times to tight ends, 28 or more twice. Ingram, week 7 against Philadelphia, had 10.9 fantasy points, so he's already had 1 decent game against them, and he's had 9 or more targets each of the last 3 games. That makes him Saturday star. Here's a real Saturday star. TJ Hawkinson has had a great year. I feel like he's one of those top guys that you can really count on every week at this point. Playing Washington football team, they've given up the 6th most fantasy points to the tight end spot. 10 or more fantasy points 4 times this year. They've allowed 6 touchdowns to tight ends. Hawkinson has found the end zone 4 of his last 5 games, and he's had 10 or more fantasy points 6 of his 8 games. I feel like this is a guy that you can truly count on week in and week out. I love TJ Hawkinson. He'll be my top start on tomorrow's start-sit list. Another guy that's been a little bit tough to figure out is Mike Gesicki, but I have him as a top matchup for tomorrow. Gesicki against the Chargers are allowing the 8th most fantasy points to tight ends. They've given up 6 touchdowns to tight ends this year and have given up 10 or more fantasy points 5 times. He has had Gesicki, that is, has had 10 or more fantasy points only twice, so kind of a tough player to guess on. But this is a good matchup. Perhaps you're streaming somebody if you don't have Travis Kelce tomorrow, on a bye, or anybody else that's on a bye. I think it's a decent spot for Mike Gesicki, so I have him on as a Saturday star. And another one of those guys is Austin Hooper. I feel like this is a good spot for Hooper coming back from injury. The Texans have allowed the 10th most fantasy points to the tight end spot. They've given up 4 touchdowns to tight ends this year. Hooper, in his last 3 games before he got hurt, 5 catches each of those 3 games. Now, without Odell Beckham there for the Browns, I feel like there's some good potential for him to get a little bump in volume. Again, coming off of injury, so hard to say for sure, but I do think this is a player that has a chance to be valuable for you moving forward from this point. So I like Austin Hooper as a top matchup tomorrow. All right, that's all of our Saturday stars we went through. Those are the top matchups for Week 10 games tomorrow. Let me get to these comments and see where I left off. I see a couple from Fabian. I see a misclick there, so I won't put that one up on the screen. I'll skip that for you, no problem. And you said last question. Sorry, don't be sorry. This is what we're here for. We love talking fantasy football. You say, if I trade Ronald Jones, I want another running back in return. Who do you think I should get from trading Ronald Jones, running back for running back? All right, let me look over on this list and see of these guys that on this little list of possible trade players. Let me just take a look and see. You're going to look for somebody. I mean, it's obviously got to be somebody that falls in line kind of with where Jones is. So, my thought is here, if you have any potential to package him with somebody else, you might end up with a little bit, more of a uptick in terms of who you get back. Like if you have, I know you said what your wide receivers were. I don't know if you have actual depth there, but perhaps you have depth at tight end, or perhaps you have depth at quarterback that you can target somebody in your league, who potentially doesn't have that depth at quarterback. Maybe they've been having trouble with whoever they've been playing. Someone you can look for to make a package type deal. I'm looking at possible other running backs. I think that Antonio Gibson is a player that you could potentially look at that is in that same realm. He's a guy that's in a timeshare now with J.D. McKissic, but he has returned good value. I think that's probably along the level you can expect to try for if it was a straight 1-for-1 with Ronald Jones. I think DeAndre Swift is another guy. I think that's a very potential trade that you might be able to make. Swift has been a little bit up and down, but he has been getting the goal line work there in Detroit. You kind of have to suffer through those games where Adrian Peterson gets some of the carries and Kerryon Johnson gets some of the carries. But Swift is going to have some value. He's not the only guy there. It's a little bit of a frustrating situation, but potentially, Jones is a frustrating situation as well moving forward. I guess, Fabian, I'm going to assume that you play in a league where your trade deadline is not tonight, because I know in most leagues, especially on Yahoo, that trade deadline is 12 o'clock midnight on the West Coast. Perhaps you're playing in a league that has a trade deadline that's farther off, and that means that you might have some more time to make that decision. If that is the case, then that certainly gives you one more week to kind of monitor what happens between Jones and Fournette and see where you're at. If I pull up, what I did here is I pulled up just the straight running backs, all of them, in terms of where they're at for the season, to see if I look down this list, who else I think could be in that category. You already have Nyheim Hines. I think that here are players that fantasy managers are probably going to be looking to get rid of at this point. They're probably unhappy with. If you got David Montgomery, chances are you're not happy with his production. He has had a solid floor. When he's been healthy, he's the only running back there. He has been getting all of the work. He hasn't been doing a lot with it. But you're looking at a situation where you've got a guy who's getting all the volume and just kind of producing at a reasonable level. He's been in the low 10s. A couple of stinker games, been right around 10, like with one game above that. I'm looking at half-point PPR. It's had one in the 20s. But at least with a guy like that, when he's back, you can expect him to have a reasonable floor because he's the only guy there, whereas Jones is splitting potentially or worse. So that's a guy that I think a fantasy manager might be down on and might be willing to get rid of. As I look down the line, David Johnson. This is a guy, another guy that fantasy managers might be looking to get rid of at this point. Unfortunately, which this was a surprise to me, they put David Johnson on IR. He's in concussion protocol. Usually IR is 3 weeks, is minimum 3 weeks. Usually concussion protocol doesn't last that long. So I don't know what that means. I don't know why they did that with Johnson, unless they're planning on giving Duke Johnson the work, moving they're not happy with David Johnson. And they want to give Duke Johnson a shot, which means if he has weeks, he could be taking over that backfield. I don't know why. I'm not sure about that one at all. But he's a guy that it would be more of a risk if you were to make a trade for him, simply because of the fact that you don't know what they're doing there. Looking down the line here to see other guys. I would say a guy like Zach Moss in Buffalo, who is not a top guy, but seems to be the guy that is getting the goal line work there with regularity for the Bills. Devin Singletary is the guy that was more known at draft time. But Zach Moss has been the guy that seems to have more potential to actually get points there. The Bills have not been running the ball great, but he's a guy that I would see as a possibility. Beyond that, I don't know that there's a lot more that I would put in that category. I'm not going to say don't go out and try for a Joshua Kelly. That's a tough timeshare. Eckler's coming back. J.K. Dobbins, no any of those guys where they're splitting. Perhaps a Raheem Mostert who's on IR. I don't remember if you said Mostert. I know you said some of your guys were hurt. I don't remember if you said Mostert was one of your guys. I don't think that you did. Perhaps that's someone who you might be able to try to figure out a way to get from another team because he's still going to be out for a little while. He's out this week, and they got to buy after that. Just kind of depends on what you can give up. But, yeah, those are guys that I think are in that range. It's tough when you're going straight one for one, like running back to running back. I know that I was down on Kenyon Drake, and I was able to trade him away in one of my leagues straight for David Johnson. I liked David Johnson coming into the year. I liked the work they were giving him. I felt like he was going to be much less of a headache for me. Like I knew kind of the range he was going to be. Perhaps he wasn't going to be the guy that had that huge game, but I could feel a little bit safer. Like if he was my flex, that he wasn't going to like get me beat for the week. Whereas I felt like, Kenyon Drake, I was looking for RB1 production and I was getting flex production at best. And that to me was like, I just got sick of it. I didn't want to do it. Like for other people, it might not be that way. So I literally went out and I shopped Drake in that league to everybody I could. I offered everybody at the same time, any players that I thought could make my roster better that were trades that I was happy with. I put them all out there and I figured any comeback, I'm going to be happy with it. That was what I did. Ended up with David Johnson. I was happy with that until he got hurt, obviously. But yeah, those are players that I think are at that level. That is reasonable to expect to try to get back. By all means, if you do have somebody that you can package with at another position, something to think about, and perhaps you might be able to shoot for a little bit more. But hopefully there's somebody in your league that will talk trade with you, and you can see, if you can get someone that might feel a little safer. Or, you never know. Like I said, tomorrow's game comes along. Ronald Jones gets off to a good start. They go with a hot hand. Could change your mind at that point. By all means, that's a game to watch to kind of keep an eye on and see, what you decide to do moving forward. But either way, hope it works out for you, obviously. And again, Fabian, thank you for being here. And for sure, thank you all for being on the live stream with us tonight. Hopefully we got a lot of good information out there. Got a lot of great games coming up tomorrow. We got more games at 4 o'clock than we got at 1 o'clock. That's different. And I see one follow-up here. Thanks, man. We'll think about the trade talks with my league. Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Fabian. You don't have to thank us. Thank you for being here. Well, without you guys, the viewers, our show is not the same. So we're glad to have you all here, and we're glad that you all jump right in there in the chat and ask your questions. That's what we want. So, yeah, it's been a good show. We've been here for almost 3 hours now, so hopefully we got a lot of information out to you guys. We're looking for a big day of football tomorrow, and we will put up our information. This is our Sunday pregame show, TFF Live, tomorrow / later today at 12 noon. We are with you all the way up until game time, getting you ready for your matchups, answering your fantasy football questions, and we can't wait to see what happens in tomorrow's games. In addition, we will get you all of our information. Fantasy Follow, we are a brand new channel on YouTube. We thank you for streaming with us live. If you've been watching on replay, we thank you for watching the entire show, and please leave us your comments. Or if you like what we're doing here, drop us a thumbs up. But either way, or even a share. But either way, be sure to subscribe to our channel because, like I said, we are brand new. We aren't necessarily as easy to find. We don't come up quite as high in the searches. So we want to make sure that you guys get notifications for when we have new content. And also, you'll be helping us along our way to our goal of 100 new subscribers. So we appreciate you being here with us. On Twitter, we are there at the Fantasy Follow, and that's fantasy spelled FNTSY. And you can send us your fantasy football questions during the week using the hashtag AskTFFLive, and we will answer those questions live on our Sunday pregame show. Facebook / the Fantasy Follow, and our website, thefantasyfollow.com. A lot of information on tonight's show. We hope everyone enjoyed it. Can't wait for a Sunday slate of games tomorrow. A lot of good action to come. We hope everyone crushes in their fantasy football matchups, and hope all those lineup decisions work out exactly how you plan them. So, as always, we will say good luck in fantasy. We'll see you next time.